What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Hope you guys are having a good weekend. Happy Saturday. Welcome to the NFL show, whatever this thing's called. The Marathon Breakdown Rundown Show. A little game by game for the Sunday main slate. Should be fun. If you weren't here the other day, we went through quarterbacks. We went through game environments. Tried to shave some time off of this show. We're primarily going to be talking skill players, previous performance over the first couple of weeks, what the defenses look like a little bit, talk stack rankings, player rankings as we go through. We'll see how we do time-wise. It's probably going to be a long one, as usual. But nothing like that for a Saturday afternoon. Harold Haas is here. Appreciate the sending out the retweet on the notification about the show, Harold. Always helps out, guys. If you could put that in front of new eyeballs, always helps. Making a push to get to 1,000 subscribers by the new year. That'd be great. Got a couple over the last few days. Tell your friends. Like I said yesterday, even if they pop in, just go bing, subscribe, mute the notifications right away. I don't care. Just want to get to the 1,000. Helps us out. Check out our guys at Ace Mind. I'm sure all you guys know that already. I've got some sims running in the background. I'll be completely honest, I slapped them together really quick. Didn't have time to build any lineups. So we'll see what comes up from the Ace Mind sims that are running in the background, assuming they get through. With these gigantic slates, it does chew up some of the lineup generation time. It looks like the DraftKings one is actually hung up right now. That was the one I didn't really have a good chance to check. We'll see what we get. FanDuel one seems like it's running. That one I was kind of expecting to run a little bit better because I had it teed up already because that's what I use. The DraftKings one is, might die on the vine here. We'll see what happens. But anyway, I've got a nice full board lined up. Stephen Leibowitz is here. Power's here. Power's sharing the Brewers lineup. We've got that one up on the site. As far as I can remember, we're waiting on the Yanks and the Dodgers right now. Last two lineups for the baseball slate. Could be interesting lineups for both of them. Both of those star pack teams might give some people a day off over the weekend. Speaking of some upcoming days off, you guys see in baseball, did you see C.J. Abrams out gambling at the casino till like 6 a.m. on a game day with an afternoon game coming up? So instead of playing in the afternoon game, they sent him to A-ball. Pretty harsh punishment. And that season is apparently ending like tomorrow, so he's not going to be playing. They're just sending him to like go stay in a motel in whatever town that is. But pretty dumb move, gotta say. Like the player. Don't like that decision all that much, but I get it. I mean, it's 22, 23, like, it happens. Anyway, let's dive on in. We got some stuff loaded up here. Good place to start, maybe some of the stack rankings. Take a look at. Where do we got? You know what? I think I still got them buried here. Let's see. I think they're right there. Yep. There we go. I knew there's something else on here that I wanted to show. So let me stretch this back a little bit. You guys can still see that okay, right? How's that? Let's see. That looks okay. Not great, but good enough for government work. So, as usual, player rankings right in here. DraftKings, FanDuel, I colored them just to make life a little bit easier. Vegas info. Stack rankings. Same situation on DraftKings. The Sunday night game is not there. It's on the FanDuel slate. That's this pretty good-looking KC Atlanta game. Should be a lot of fun. I like some pieces from that game. There's some cheap running back in that game opportunity with Carson Steele from the Kansas City side. Going to be interesting there, but not on DraftKings. You can see how those teams stack up on the FanDuel slate, though. But some interesting stuff to work with. We're going to go alphabetically again through the games here, as we've done. Am I coming through like really loud? It looks like this volume knob is turned up all the way. Am I uniquely loud as compared to normal? Anybody in chat, let me know. I updated the Vegas numbers. Minor, point here, point there kind of movement in the numbers. All the projections are pretty fresh and updated. Sounding okay? Thanks, Steven. Appreciate you. Hit the like button as we get started. Vegas could be a good place to start. Or we'll do it on this screen, and we'll just kind of talk each game through in a kind of like going through the pitchers and the Vegas lines in baseball. I think a good place to start. We'll talk about the stack rankings in with that. So starting with that first game up, and again, these are going to be out of order time-wise, but it's just going alphabetically here. Easiest way to sort this board. Pretty good matchup with a 47.5-point total and a 1-point spread in Baltimore's favor in a game in Dallas. So should be a tight ball game. A lot of scoring back and forth. Two good offenses with at least reasonable quarterbacks. Whatever you think of Dak and Lamar Jackson, they're at least talented enough to get up and down the field, and obviously Lamar's a multi-time MVP winner, and Dak is a highly capable guy, but people tend to dislike these two quarterbacks for reasons that I don't really understand. I was talking to a Cowboys fan the other day about how he hates Dak Prescott. I think we've got a resident Cowboys fan somewhere out there that hates Dak Prescott. I think Dak is a capable enough quarterback. He's obviously got tremendous weapon in CeeDee Lamb and some interesting down board pieces. We need Jake Ferguson to be out there. He's cleared off the injury report, so should be playing. I've got him back in the projections here. Reasonable downboard receiving core for Dallas, and then the multi-headed running back situation. They're going up against a defense in Baltimore that currently is first with 2.7 yards allowed per rush attempt, 7.8 yards allowed per pass attempt through the air, though, kind of balances things out a little bit. And then on the Baltimore side, they rank as stacked 6 by points on DraftKings, 5 by value, 4-7 on FanDuel by those same categories. Going up against what has been a gettable Dallas defense so far. They're going to be a fairly high-scoring defense, I think, in terms of DFS points and fantasy points throughout the season, but I think they will be gettable in terms of being able to march the ball down the field, in terms of allowing some scoring. And we've seen that already. 23rd ranked 4.9 yards per rush attempt, 6.2 yards per pass attempt. I put these numbers into the groups article, by the way. If you haven't read this week's group article, I haven't done the full game notes yet, but I added game total and implied point spread, implied points. I added play calling for each team with, like Arizona is the first one up here, 53.28% rush plays, 46.72% pass, just to give you a gauge of like what type of offenses they're running in the most simplistic way possible. And then in the next line there, I put it in red to make it as clear as I possibly could. It's the opposing defense that they're going to be facing and the numbers that defense has given up so far. So for example, for Arizona, it's the numbers on the other side of that game. For Detroit, saying 3.3 yards per rush attempt, 6.6 yards per pass attempt. So that is not Arizona's defense. That's the opposing defense. I feel like it's pretty clear, but I just wanted to make sure that I at least mentioned it. Just trying to add, interesting, relevant information into that article in the best format possible to help make decisions about, does this team actually look good in this spot? In this case, I think the answer for both of these teams is yes. Definitely it's Baltimore, though, a little bit favored, obviously, by the numbers here. But Dallas, a pretty playable 10th and 13th, kind of middle-of-the-board type stack against the, at least so far, in over 2 weeks, the better of the two defenses. There's a chance that Carolina with Andy Dalton at the helm hangs with Las Vegas a little bit, but I really don't like their chances all that much. It's been a minute for Dalton. So I'm really not a big fan of the Carolina side of that one. What I do kind of like, though, and I'm kind of interested in because it's fairly cheap, is the Vegas passing attack. You can see that they rank out just 14th by points, but 8th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 14th by points, and 11th by points per dollar on FanDuel. You can see where Brock Bowers lands as a tight end, 3rd and 1st on both sites. Devontae, 6th and 10, 7 and 9. I have not all that much faith in Gardner Minshew, but I do have enough faith in Gardner Minshew, given that they've been throwing the ball a fairly significant amount of the time, 67.23% passing, 32.7% rushing in that offense. They've got a 23 and a quarter or higher, I think, when the line moved, implied total, and they're going up against a defense that's been allowing 7.5 yards per pass attempt so far this season. So it just does feed the idea of, on volume, on just the ineptitude of the opposing defense, that a Gardner Minshew, Devontae, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, however you want to put it together, kind of a stack could come through. It's another multi-headed running back situation. Zamir White, Alexander Madison with a little bit of a lean towards Zamir White in terms of the overall. But Madison definitely has poked his head in and gotten involved a little bit early. So mix and match quality there, but I think the passing attack in that one's kind of interesting. You could potentially play some pieces from Carolina on the other side of that, at least with the idea that there might be some more capable quarterback play. It at least puts Deontay Johnson on the board for a bring-back play, maybe, if you're playing up Vegas a little bit. It maybe puts Xavier Legette on there, Adam Thielen on there for his touchdown upside, but it's really limited. I hate the running game on that team. Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, I don't want any part of either one of them on most slates. This one doesn't look particularly appealing, even against a 31st currently ranked rush defense that was allowing 6.1 yards per rush attempt. Maybe some darts on a Chuba Hubbard who doesn't project all that poorly. But, I mean, how many times do we need to fail with Chuba Hubbard before we realize he's not that good of a running back? I really am not a big buyer there. Chicago and Indy, speaking of ineptitude, Caleb Williams, not looking great over the first 2 weeks. Definitely has not paid off his draft pick and all the enthusiasm yet. I still think we're going to get there. There's obviously a ton of talent in that kid, but it really has been ugly over the first couple of games. Just a 1-point spread in this one, a 43.5 point total on the board. A couple of very effective quarterbacks, multifaceted quarterbacks who can both throw the ball down the field, hypothetically anyway, with Caleb Williams. We know that Anthony Richardson can. Both can run with the ball. Both can make big plays. They've both got big play skill players on their side. We're going to get into DJ Moore and Rome Dunze. No Keenan Allen again this week. Cole Kmet maybe a little bit, and then some of the downboard guys on the Chicago side. It's a little bit more limited than when they're going to have both star receivers out there, but there's still a lot to work with on Chicago if you have any faith at all in Caleb. They've gotten a little bit cheap, but they rank out as stack 18-17 on DraftKings and stack 21 on FanDuel for a reason. Those are pretty low-end projections. Indy's defense has been gettable, though. 5.1 yards per pass attempt, 7.1 yards per rush attempt. So I think you just continue going back to the well until it finally clicks for Chicago, and then I think you're going to be okay. On the other side, Anthony Richardson's been very good to start the season. Ranks out really well again this week. Going up against a defense that ranks 15th against the run, 4.5 yards allowed per rush attempt so far. They're just allowing 5 yards per pass attempt, which lands 4th. But the big shot nature of this defense, I think, can kind of overcome that. All he needs to do is make a few big downfield throws, and that's what they're taking. That's what they're trying to do in a big, big way. We talked about his intended air yards per pass attempt, Anthony Richardson. We talked about it the other day during the quarterback show. And I've got the passing numbers hidden because I was going through the slate, making sure that everybody was going to be on the board for us, and I was saying, oh, well, we won't talk about the quarterbacks. And, of course, the first thing I start talking about is a quarterback. 13.7 intended air yards per pass attempt, completing 7.8 yards per pass attempt, completing 5.6 air yards per pass attempt. Taking downfield shots to Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell, getting Josh Downs back into the mix. Multiple tight ends on that team, none of them particularly noteworthy, but there's a lot of ways to go with Indy, and they've got a high-end running back in Jonathan Taylor who lands 6'7 on DraftKings, 6'6 on FanDuel at the position. Colts D looks pretty decent, especially on FanDuel where they land 8th by points, but 1st by points per dollar value. They're only 3,800 over there going up against a scuffling Chicago offense. I know I think it was Trey, wanted me to talk defenses a little bit more. I made sure to get in there, Trey. I said it last week, and it was true that, a lot of times I'll let the defenses just kind of fall where they may, but I made a specific point, I think it was Trey, made a specific point this week to pull up defenses, give it some thought, give it some hard consideration, try and get everybody appropriately landed for you. So hopefully we did a good job with defense this week. In that first game, there was kind of a wash. They both land okay, but kind of middle of the board overall. They're all ranked. Dallas looks okay in the points per dollar on FanDuel, not at all on DraftKings. That one didn't come up right. Carolina doesn't rank out great defensively, obviously. Vegas does, because they're playing Carolina. 2nd by points, 8th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 10th by points per dollar on FanDuel. Anyway, we're not going to get lost in defense. We got a ways to go here. Bo Nix and Denver also haven't really looked all that good yet. Don't know that there's going to be much there. Don't know how much reason there is to believe in what we've seen so far, or I kind of believe in what we've seen so far because it hasn't been good. Believe that there's more than what we've seen so far is what I question. Javonte Williams, Julian McLaughlin, a talented but multi-headed running back situation that kind of just, eats its own tail. You get a lot of targets for Cortland Sutton, but mix and match quality output ranks in the 30s across sites. Josh Reynolds, it's a very, very limited team overall. They're going up against Tampa Bay, who lands in the middle of the board in both defensive categories so far as yardage allowed. Tampa Bay's okay. They're heavily favored at 6.5-point favorites in this one. Just a 40.5-point total. It might not be the biggest day for Baker and the guys here. I know we've liked this team over the first couple of weeks and we've succeeded with them, and they don't even project out poorly. Just might be a situation where, they only have to take out so much to beat this Denver team. So don't love it, but it's definitely playable. Baker lands 9-7 on DraftKings, 9-10 on FanDuel. You get very good rankings on Mike Evans, Chris Godwin through the mid-teens, and they're both fairly affordable. 14.26 and 18.16 for those two receivers on DraftKings, 14.31, 18.13 on FanDuel. So a lot of directions you could go with Tampa. I've got Bucky White Bucky White. Just mash them together. I've got Rashad White and Bucky Irving a little bit closer, I think, than maybe some other places do. I'm really expecting Bucky Irving to walk away with this job at some point. It hasn't happened yet, but it's Rashad White is a limited running back. There's a lot of volume there, and that's what's kept him alive. But I think Bucky's going to take that job, and I like that price. I think he is a playable running back this week. Just a value dart, but not off the board. And then there's a little depth, Julian McLaughlin, McMillan, Kate Otten, mix and match caliber tight end. Lands 11.8 on DraftKings. A little bit of value there upside-wise. Arizona-Detroit, really appealing game here with a 52-point total to lead the slate. Just a 2.5-point spread, so everybody likes this one to be close. A lot of playable pieces on both sides. Look at all these single-digit rankings on the Detroit side. Goff, one of the top 10 quarterbacks. Amon-Ra, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, both in the top 10 or thereabouts at the running back spot. Samuel Laporta, a highly ranked tight end. On the other side, Marvin ranks... Ooh. On the other side, Kyler ranks among the best quarterbacks. Marvin ranks out great, 8 by points on both sides. Slips at 13, but that's totally playable by points per dollar on DraftKings. 8 on FanDuel. Trey McBride lands super high end. The top 2 tight ends in football basically squaring off. James Conner is more of a mix and match running back these days for me. 15th across both sides. You could do a lot worse. He's not unfairly priced for that role, but is 20th, 23rd by points per dollar. Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. It gets a little bit thinner, a little bit faster on the Arizona side. I don't love any of these options, but if you're just looking to pick off a cheap scoring play and a cheap downfield shot, you could do worse than going to this game with such a big total. It's not like Murray's, there is a lane through which Murray only throws the ball to Harrison and McBride, but we'll see a couple of looks for some of these guys. I do feel like it's a little bit deeper on the Detroit side. Jameson doesn't land too poorly in the mid-20s here. Khalif Raymond is a downfield shot for a cheap price. You can see him and Tim Patrick don't project out well at all. They're just darts, but they're at least going to be out there for a couple of snaps. So there's a lot to work with in that big, juicy total 52-point game. Definitely going to be a popular one, but most likely going to be worth getting to. Green Bay and Tennessee, I went back and forth. I had Malik Willis in earlier in the week. That's what we talked about on the quarterback show on Wednesday. And then I popped Jordan Love back in here just on rumors that he was going to maybe play. He'd been practicing in limited form. And then today I saw that they elevated the backup quarterback, but they didn't deactivate Love for the week yet. So it's kind of a up in the air game time decision. Now I'm just Googling, see if anything new has come out. Let's see what this latest report says. It says almost exactly what I just said. Yeah, game time decision. So keep an eye on it. I think it makes sense to project Love and put the Packers where they would be with him at the helm and then adjust down rather than try and scramble and adjust up in the other direction. Think that makes sense? Bridge Lions here smoking that Stoke. Early run on the site, which their Sims gave me a lot of Caleb, Darnold, Geno, Baker. Interesting. Don't know if these Sims are going to get through. What I'll try to do at worst is when I actually get a chance after the show later on tonight, as I'm writing up the article and everything, I'll get these Sims run correctly, because I'm sure I just screwed up the ownership with those uploads and everything, because there's 400 and some odd players in there. So I'll get those run correctly, and I'll either drop them into Discord with just some high-end results, or I'll create an article about it, or put it into the group's article maybe somewhere. But I'll try and share some of that. But that seems... It's an interesting selection of quarterbacks. Obviously, it's leaning toward the lower owned and trying to find some leverage there. I'm sure it's set toward the big slate. I think Geno's not bad. He's in a decent total. Baker's all right. Caleb, I really am not in on. And then Darnold. There's better spots. But I'm not going to argue with the math either. Those guys obviously have good results from their sim tools. Speaking of sim tools, check out acemind.io if you don't know them already. Go check them out. So on the Green Bay side, a lot of weapons to work with. There's always this really, really deep receiving core where basically anybody could get involved in any given slate. There are a range of prices and a range of projections, but there's realistic ceiling for basically any one of these wideouts on this team. They've got a very high-end running back in Josh Jacobs who could succeed. He ranks out just okay this week for price and for points. But there's a lot of different directions that Green Bay could go. They're going up against what has been a good Tennessee defense so far. They're ranked 10th against the run, second against the pass so far in yards per attempt. On the other side of that, we've got a very effective Tony Pollard with a banged-up Tajay Spears who's questionable for this one, so it could be even bigger for Tony Pollard this week. He's kind of been the lead back there, and he's been successful over the first couple of weeks. I kind of like the looks again as just a mid-board talent and a mid-board price. It's not like his price has gone up with decent production over the first couple. 13th by points, 8th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 11th on FanDuel, not bad. They've got decent weapons in the passing game to work with Will Levis. I just don't love the quarterback on the Tennessee side. Green Bay's defense has been highly gettable. They're 27th against the run and 20th against the pass so far by YPA, but not the best offense in the world. I kind of am interested maybe in shares of the running backs, maybe in shares of Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins as just one-offs in other lineups, because everybody's affordable. Everybody's got at least touchdown upside. There's some big game upside in Calvin Ridley. If he's finally fully healthy, DeAndre Hopkins could be interesting. But not my favorite offense. 38.5 point total as well is not necessarily worth chasing. Tennessee favored by 3 in the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see a big offensive outlay by that team. 46 point total here, a lot more to work with. Two more interesting offenses as well. Minnesota and Houston. We know Houston's got that three-headed dragon at the wide receiver position with Nico, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell. CJ Stroud, premium quarterback. Didn't have to have a big game in week 2. Just did enough to win that game and be effective against the Bears. They had an easy night that night, but should be a little bit more challenged for this one. Minnesota so far this season allowing 3.8 yards per rush attempt, 5.9 yards per pass attempt. Those rank 8th and 10th respectively. On the other side, the Houston defense, 4 yards per rush attempt, 5.9 yards per pass attempt, 9th and 11th. So these teams have been neck and neck with one another over the first 2 weeks. Very small sample, of course, as far as being able to gain yardage against them. I think it collides in both of these teams. Fairly effective offenses end up winning the day a little bit. There are premium players at skill positions on both sides. For Minnesota, they've got Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison's going to be out already, confirmed. But Justin Jefferson looks like he's going to play. Sammy Darnold at the quarterback position. It's looked all right over the first couple weeks. We've kind of gotten away with it. Jefferson lands number 1 by points at the wideout position, number 9 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 110 on FanDuel. Darnold's going to have to get him the ball. He does rank well for points per dollar, 3rd on DraftKings, 6th on FanDuel, just 13th ranked by points on both sites, though. Aaron Jones, fairly decent running back. We talked about him coming into the season as having a dynamite close to his year over the last 3 weeks of regular season and then 2 playoff games last year. It's just looked okay over the first couple of weeks of this season. Had a bad week too. Ranks out just all right. but playable. 10th by points per dollar on DraftKings. Down depth chart, got some mix and match pieces maybe in Jalen Nailor, Brandon Powell at the wide receiver positions, but it's really primarily going to be about those three and then mix and matching your way through some of these guys. But there's a lot of pieces to work with as far as going back and forth. It's probably better stacked. Houston stack plus a Jefferson, Houston stack plus a Jones, Houston stack with a Nailor Dart, something like that. More limited on the Minnesota side. Although maybe if you were looking to just go skinny stack, you just easily go Darnold Jefferson and then one of these guys, where Stroud would almost demand a two-man stack. Not completely, but if Houston goes off, they're going to go off, and you're going to want to have probably a Stroud plus 2. Joe Mixon out for the Houston side, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So that's an impact. It's going to be stupid Cam Akers getting the first shot. He's very cheap. I don't have him quite as high as everybody else does, but he still lands number 1 by points per dollar value because he's only 4,000 on the FanDuel slate. Can't believe I almost forgot that. 23rd by overall points, 27-17 on DraftKings because they got him up to 4,700 at least. Just not really a fan of this running back at all. So we'll give him a look in just a minute. But yeah, he's a piece of value for sure. Kind of low faith from me. They've got Dare Ogunbowale. Took me a second to think it through. And then this guy, British Brooks, who I know literally nothing about, who's going to be active apparently this week. But Dare would be the next up guy in that offense. I consider him not just as good necessarily as Cam Akers, because I do think Akers is going to out-touch him. But I think it's closer than most places might be thinking. So that's one last wrinkle in that one. Atlanta KC, as mentioned, only on the FanDuel slate. We'll kind of breeze through it now. Everybody knows the two quarterbacks in play here. Everybody kind of has a good feel for these offenses, I think. Drake London's a high-end receiver. Kyle Pitts is just kind of a mix-and-match output tight end with a lot more talent than that. Mooney and Ray McLeod have gotten interesting over the last couple of weeks. They've been cheap. They've been involved in the offense. Algier touches the ball a little bit and could definitely poach some touchdowns from Bijan, their high-end running back, who's very high priced but also very high projected, 5'10" on FanDuel. On this side, they're going to be without a couple of pieces, and it's Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, multi-headed running back, taking over for Pacheco, who broke his leg. Carson Steele's going to get the first look. He got all the touches at the running back spot, or all the carries anyway, at the running back spot at the end of the game last week. Perrin was in there, but he only got a few targets, didn't actually carry the ball, and it looks that's like how that's going to be coming out. This KC offense probably just going to be passing the ball a lot, dinking and dunking their way down the field, working Samaje Perine into that equation. But when they actually need to carry the ball, when they need somebody to bust through the line, gain 2 yards, get it into the end zone, gain the first down, whatever the case may be, Carson Steele's going to be that guy coming through. So he's interesting at the very cheap price on FanDuel at $5,200. Lands 26-16, but I think plays up a little bit better than that. Just mix and match quality at the receiver positions outside of Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, and Xavier Worthy on the KC side. And then talk through Atlanta basically up and down. You do have names down here like Justin Watson and Juju Smith-Schuster that we've been familiar with. But these guys, Sky Moore and Mecole Hardman as well. And especially down here, it's extremely limited. Mecole Hardman's only played on special teams so far. These guys have gotten only limited looks. Noah Gray as a backup tight end is kind of interesting. Travis Kelce hasn't done much out there yet this season. Chargers and the Steelers. Meh kind of a game. 36-point total. 2.5-point spread in Pittsburgh's favor. I can kind of buy that. I could kind of buy some Pittsburgh defense, I think, against the Chargers. Don't really like this Chargers team at all. J.K. Dobbins has been good for them so far. Not a lot else working. Quentin Johnston maybe stepping up and earning his keep as a first-round pick from last year. Maybe. But they've been pretty limited. They ranked 22, 24, 24, 26 across sites. And then on the Steelers side, with Justin Fields at the helm, they really haven't looked like much. The running game's been kind of a mishmash. There's not a lot to like coming out of Pittsburgh right now. They land 21-23 on DraftKings, 23-25 on FanDuel. Both of these defenses have been effective so far. 3.7 yards allowed per rush attempt, 6 yards allowed per pass attempt by Pittsburgh. 11th ranked, 4 yards allowed per rush attempt by LA, 5 yards per pass attempt, third ranked. Can you go lay down, please? Third ranked by the Chargers. In terms of the quality, the scoring of those defenses, just real quick. The Steelers, 4 sacks, 4 interceptions so far, gaining nearly a 30% pressure rate against the quarterback. Looks pretty realistic. Throwing the Chargers, 15% pressure rate at Justin Fields. They've only come away with 3 sacks, only 1 pick. Not exactly gaining a ton of pressure, and Fields with all that escapability. If I had to choose one of these defenses for that reason and that reason alone, I think I would lean Pittsburgh more than LA. But kind of mediocre quality across the board on both sides. There are playable options, McConkey, Quentin Johnston. Between the receivers on the LA side, I'd probably lean to Johnston. It seems like there's a little bit of developing connection there. He is a skilled guy. He ranks out slightly better by points per dollar than McConkey does. J.K. Dobbins is the more obvious play, just kind of on his own as a running back, is perfectly fine outside of stacks. Josh Palmer, mix and match. Hayden Hurst is not a lot to love. And then Pickens, Freiermuth, the multi-headed running back with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. It's really it from the Pittsburgh side. Basically, all those guys are just kind of standalone here and there where they might fit in price or ownership to differentiate something. Freiermuth doesn't land too poorly by ranking for tight ends. 7th by points, 10th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 11-10 on FanDuel. It's only just borderline playable, though. You can see how good the defense lands. Miami and Seattle. Miami's going to be really interesting with Skylar Thompson at the helm. Also no Raheem Mostert, so it's Devon Achane show again this week. It's Tyreek Hill up at the top and Jalen Waddle working with Skylar. Those are still extremely, extremely good weapons. All Skylar Thompson has to do is deliver the ball to them every now and again for this team to potentially be able to succeed. I can see a ton of volume going toward Devon Achane. He ranks out incredibly well, 1-2, 2-2 across sites. 41-point total in the game. Seattle favored by 4.5. Geno was mentioned in the chat before. Is coming up in Sims quite a bit at some other sites. I can buy in on that. Geno's a highly accurate quarterback. He's got very good weapons to work with in DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. They've got Zach Charbonnet picking up the slack at running back with Kenny Walker out again. Charbonnet looks okay. 5th by points per dollar on DK. 4th by points per dollar on FanDuel. It's a playable Seattle offense most of the time. They're going up against a 17th and 23rd ranked against the run and the pass, respectively, defense so far this season. I just don't love the point total, 41 points. Seattle, decent favorites. I could see Seattle getting out to a lead and just playing safe and grindy. Just run the ball. So, don't love the Seattle spot. And then the Miami side, you do still have the explosive playability. And maybe Hill and Waddle go a little bit under-owned than where they should be. And we've seen stranger things happen than a guy like Skylar Thompson throwing a couple touchdown passes. It's not off the board. It does help make the stack cheaper if you decide to stack it, but they're probably better deployed on their own. Jonnu Smith, a reasonable tight end in that mix as well, but doesn't exactly rank out great, limited by the quarterback. An atrocious game between New York and Cleveland. I really like the looks of Malik Neighbors so far. He, not Daniel Jones, led that Giants team to competency in the passing game the other day. He was basically the only guy they targeted. Daniel Jones looked just moderately okay. Still missed Neighbors most of the time, or at least half the time. But they looked somewhat competent, and that's almost exclusively because of Neighbors. Basically, nothing else in this offense looks good. I know Devin Singletary gained some yards, nearly got to 100 yards. The word nearly comes into play a lot with Devin Singletary. I feel like he's nearly a good running back, but he's not. Ranks in the mid-20s. Don't really like it. Don't like any of the ancillary receivers on that team. Theo Johnson, the cheap tight end who had taken over the starting role, didn't do anything at all, and now they've got Chris Manhertz in the equation as well there. It's just a weird team that's not very good at all at football. They're going to be colliding with a defense that's been stopping the pass pretty effectively this year, was pretty effective against it last year, so I really don't like the upside for Daniel Jones or any of his weapons this week. It's just the Malik Neighbors on his own show from me from the Giants offense. And then I do think the Cleveland offense runs deeper. right? They've got Jerome Ford at the running back spot with no Pierre Strong, so it's a little bit his job there. They've got Jerry Jeudy and Amari Cooper, a multi-headed wide receiver that's a B and a B plus, something like that. Neither guy is a star, but neither guy is bad. An effective third man in as far as the wide receiver position with Elijah Moore there. Jordan Akins an effective backup tight end with Njoku out again. So there are pieces on Cleveland. I just don't buy in that much on Deshaun Watson. I know he managed them to a win the other day. He ranks out okay, 15-10, 15-16 across sites. It's a little point per dollar upside maybe on DraftKings at 55. Not a great opportunity, though. Giants' defense has been bad. 29th by rush yards, 27th by pass yards. What's that vaunted new and improved Giants pass rush getting us so far? 6 sacks, 23.4% pressure rate on a 26% blitz. They've managed 1 pick so far. It's not going to be pretty. That's just an ugly game all around, 39-point total. Not a lot of appeal. Cleveland favored by 6 as well. Could just turn into a situation where Cleveland's up by a couple and just grinds it down. And the Giants will do them all the favors in the world with probably a couple interceptions, some bad penalties, some fumbles, etc., etc. Game that I absolutely love for DFS, New Orleans and Philly, 49.5-point total. I have the New Orleans offense, I believe, quite a bit higher than everybody else does. I think Philly's defense is entirely targetable. They were super targetable through the air last year. That same thing is true coming back this year. 7.6 yards per pass attempt so far. They're also allowing 6.4 yards per rush attempt, and Alvin Kamara's on this team with all of his ability on the ground coming off another huge touchdown day. Derek Carr's been playing great. He's established an immediate connection down the field with Rashid Shaheed this year. He's looked spectacular. He rates out very, very well. 29th and 20th by points and points per dollar. 28th and 26th for a $5,300, $6,300 still cheap wide receiver against such a weak pass defense. They've got a true number 1 receiver who hasn't really hit the ground running this year in Chris Olave. Ranks 12-3 on DK, 13-4 on FanDuel. Playable tight end in Juwan Johnson, who was limited last time out. They've got Taysom Hill. They've also got Foster Moreau, who was the nominal starter, but wasn't all that much better the last time out. Not sure what's going to happen with the tight end position on this team. That's been the one limiting spot, just with the volume that goes to the receivers down the field, and then with Alvin Kamara, the volume monster there. There hasn't been a lot left over, but it could be a day, kind of like what we were saying with Tyler Conklin with the Jets the other day, where they had ignored him basically over the first 2 weeks. But I was saying, look, this guy caught 60-some-odd passes last year. He was a big piece over the past couple of seasons in terms of their targets. And maybe they end up going back to him and actually making a concerted effort in week 3 in their Thursday game to throw to him. Nothing that says that happened and then this will happen, but maybe by that same narrative, you could see upside for Juwan Johnson. Because I do think Juwan Johnson is the go-to tight end receiver here. I think he's the most talented of the 3 in terms of being of the actual tight end position. Taysom Hill can throw the ball. He can run the ball. He's a gadget player. He does a little bit of everything, but I don't love it. But New Orleans ranks out as stack number 1 across the board in all categories on both sites. And then on the other side, Philly ranks 2-4 on DraftKings, 2-9 because they're a little bit expensive on FanDuel, but easily worth it. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, Devonta Smith. No Brown again this week, but it's still a highly capable offense with those 3 players. A little bit of a price offset with Dallas Goedert, who's still capable of falling into the end zone with the ball in his hands. We haven't seen much out of Jahan Dotson, but he's cheap. Effective downfield option maybe. Britton Covey was kind of interestingly getting involved on some short passes and little screen dump outs and everything the other day. So maybe we come back to that well with Brown out again. It's just an interesting team, and they stack up well enough. The New Orleans defense has been good, and I think is legitimately good. That'll be a headache. And the Philly offense has looked a little bit out of sync if you've watched them. Just trying to really get the feel for the changes in the offense, for running a little bit more of RPO with Saquon there. So it's been a little bit bumpy with that team, but I think the pieces are definitely significant. So maybe it's a situation where it's the pieces right now are more than the sum, but any of those pieces is worth going to. They make for great bringbacks on the other side of New Orleans stacks, and you can absolutely stack Philly. 43.5-point total between the Rams and the Niners. The Niners just continue to lose pieces and continue to kind of look okay. They're 9th by points, but 2nd by points per dollar on both sides. Jordan Mason still looks tremendous at the running back position. Brendan Ayuk is still a true number one receiver, and now he's going to be their true number one. Juwan Jennings is a very talented, very affordable receiver. I have no issues including a lot of Juwan Jennings in any situation that I'm going to with the Niners this week. I think he looks downright interesting. Gets thinner from there with Chris Conley and Garendo and Juszczyk and whoever Jake Tongs is at the tight end position. There's no George Kittle this week. So, severely limited in terms of the incredible depth of stars that this team pays for. But there's still a lot of talent on the field this week. That's where the depth part of that equation comes in. On the Rams side, mix and match. They're also greatly depleted by injury. They're 6.5-point dogs in a game with a 43.5-point total, so a lot of that weight going in San Francisco's direction. Demarcus Robinson now is going to be the number one. He's fine, but this is not a true number one receiver. It's probably the Kyren Williams show where you're just getting some Kyren shares, just kind of off on his own. He ranks 7 by points, 13 points per dollar on DraftKings, 8 points per dollar on FanDuel. Tyler Johnson, Jordan Whittington, cheap receivers down the board. If you have any faith in Matthew Stafford, maybe he leads this team to a couple of scores, but he doesn't rank out well. Doesn't look great so far this season. Going up against what has been a gettable defense so far this year, and it's gettable defenses on both sides of this one. So you can see that feeding the beast a little, but Vegas really doesn't seem to like the LA side, and I'm kind of buying into that. I think it's all San Francisco in this last one. Bridgeline, is it too early to put Gibbs in my all-time top 5? I've got Vic, LaDainian Tomlinson, Megatron, and Barry Sanders so far. I'd say it's probably a minute or so early. Little early. Vic is also an interesting choice. Can assume Bridgeline, you're a Lions fan? Just with some of those choices? I believe so. Steven? Let me double check that. They're calling him a game time decision for Justin Herbert. It's Easton Stick. Appreciate the reminder there. It's Easton Stick if Justin Herbert doesn't go. It wasn't at the forefront of my thinking because it was one that I was just kind of flying through anyway. We'll get back into it, obviously, in just a second. But yeah, I was just kind of flying through that because I really don't have that much interest in that Chargers offense anyway. Suffice to say, if it's not Herbert, I am less interested. All right, so let's get into some of the depths. Plumb some of the depths of this slate. What do you say? Hit the like and the subscribe if you get a chance. Appreciate you. All right. What's the best way I can do this? I got stuff everywhere right now. Oh, actually, I don't need that. I got that there. All right. All right, we've talked quarterback, so I'm just going to, again, breeze kind of through the quarterback position as we go through these. But obviously, Lamar rates out very, very strongly on both sides. Dak, in the meantime, just kind of lands in the middle of the board, but he does have a lot of scoring potential, 47.5-point total in this game, and the team's separated by just 1. So if Dallas is going to keep up, Dak's almost certainly going to be a part of it. So I think there's a reasonable lane where he could defy these rankings, and that projection as far as all quarterbacks stack up, it's not exactly offset by a gigantic amount from the very top guys. There's 4 points of daylight between him and Lamar as the absolute number one, sure, but there's more like 1.5, 2 points of daylight between him and most of the other highly ranked quarterbacks. So I think Dak is very, very much in play. Taking a look at some of the skill positions, Derrick Henry rates out okay at the running back spot. We'll start with the running backs, I guess. It's going up against the defense that's allowing 4.9 yards per rush attempt to get us started. He's carried the ball about 15 and a half times a game. He's seen just, a look or two. So we're slightly short of that 20 potential touch threshold that I like to look for. But it's Derrick Henry. He's been a volume beast throughout his career. So I think any given slate, we can expect a 20-carry game. We can expect a multi-touchdown game on the ground. He's already scored twice this season. 1.5 yards before contact, 2.7 yards after contact, 4.2 yards per rush attempt so far for the year. It amounts to 46 yards on 13 carries in game 1, 84 yards on an improved 18 carries in game 2, touchdown in both games. No issues with the Derrick Henry play. He lands just fine. In terms of their other running back, Justice Hill, he only carries the ball a couple of times a game. He's gained 5 yards per rush attempt, but where he gets more involved is through the air. He's seen a 5-target average. He saw 8 targets last week. He's bringing in 4 of them per game. In week 1, he caught 6 passes for 52 yards. In week 2, just 2 of 2 for 10 yards. So I had that the other way around. He saw more targets in week 1. Apologies. 8 targets week 1, just 2 targets in week 2. Oh, I know what it is. One second. Just getting back with all these stupid lookups of all these different things. This has to change to 5. I gotta update the last week column in each of these. And that's gonna be 5. There we go. That's why that last target share was wrong. All right, so Hill's just kind of on the board, but these aren't really the running backs that we tend to go to that much. He really needs to break one at low volume. It's just okay. Typically, when we're going to low-cost running backs, it's because of some sort of role enhancement. Hill's just going to be there in his usual function this week. Zay Flowers at the top of the receiving board for Baltimore. Seeing 10.5 targets a game, so 11 last week, 10 in week 1. Last week, put up 91 yards on 7 catches, got into the end zone. Definitely came around in a much bigger way against Vegas last week. Had kind of an empty game in week 1. He was targeted twice in the red zone in week 1, though. Targeted once in the red zone last week. Definitely their first read receiver. Definitely an interesting option. 28.4% of the air yards on a 6.7 yard ADOT. Not exactly operating extremely far down the field so far this year. They're taking more shots, a couple to Mark Andrews, the tight end, and a lot to Rashad Bateman at 17.4 yard ADOT, 28.8% of the air yards. He hasn't been all that successful yet. They're giving him 4.5 looks a game. He's coming away with 2.5 of them a game, 10.3 yards per target, but yet to get into the end zone. That amounts to 2 catches for 53 yards, 3 catches for 40 yards, no touchdowns across the first 2 weeks. So again, as we talk about it, and that's why I like to I do like to go through these numbers, air yard share, snap share, things like that. I think people get a little bit overhyped about some of these numbers sometimes, thinking about, oh, wow, Rashad Bateman, 28.81% of the air yards. That, look how significant a downfield target it is. That rivals the 28.4% of the air yard share. And very quickly, it gets lost in the discussion. And people start thinking that these are equivalent options because they've both got a 28% of the air yards, where Zay Flowers significantly out targets Rashad Bateman every single week without fail. So I think that gets lost in the mix with football conversations a lot. And that's why I do like to go to some of just the surface numbers with football. It's so much smaller sample, and I really, really try and harp on it across all these shows and talk about it, and hopefully more than other people do, because I think it's super important for football, is just talk about what these opportunities actually look like. And when you're talking about 4 opportunities a game, it's very, very limiting for some of these players. So that's where some of the conversations are with people like to talk about the bigger numbers. It's more exciting to talk about a 28.81% air yard share than it is about a guy who catches 2 passes a game, right? One sounds a lot more interesting and a lot juicier. And I get it. Look, I'm not saying that Bateman is not a good option because of that air yard share. I think he's an interesting option. It's just important to keep in perspective what kind of option he is. Right? He's your home run. He's your downfield, one big catch, get in the end zone. I've paid my ticket at those cheap prices. That's why when we look for those kind of plays, when we look for a $3,800 wide receiver, that's the first thing I'll go to. All right, great. I've got Rashad Bateman and a couple other guys. Jalen Tolbert is also a $3,800 wide receiver. Right? So, all right, let's go to what's the tail of the tape on those two? All right, 28.81% of the air yards on a 17.4 yard ADOT or 21.9% on an 11 yard ADOT. Tolbert's gotten a few more looks a game so far. The volume does matter in there. But that's where it comes down to, all right, now I'm already in that tier of receiver. Who's getting the bigger opportunity? Who's getting the true home run threat opportunity? And that's in that equation, I think it does slightly favor Bateman. That's actually an interesting heads up with those two at the same price. So just I like to continue to try and talk about the perspective of these numbers and what they're actually telling you rather than just flying through like, oh yeah, it's a big number, and it's a big number, and so is that one. I think I clicked on 3 that were sub 5%. Isaiah Likely in game 2 came out, just caught 2 passes for 26 yards, was targeted 3 times. Mark Andrews was targeted 5 times in week 2, caught 4 of them for 51 yards. So kind of reclaimed the primary tight end role there after Likely's big week 1. There probably will be some back and forth throughout the season. Andrews obviously is going to need to stay fully healthy for the full season, but he is still the nominal tight end 1. He still does have a lot of ability. They're throwing the ball to him down the field. They have not looked his way yet in the red zone. In week 1, Likely got 3 targets in the red zone and came away with a touchdown and 111 yards. But all indications, still Mark Andrews. As far as Lamar goes, yes, you can play Lamar naked without stacking receivers with him. It's perfectly fine. I talked about this on the quarterback show as well. When you stack this team, there is the consideration that it may be, for me at least, better to go with thinner stacks with this team. I tend to go Lamar on his own or Lamar plus 1 rather than building too much, because then you're talking about, all right, if Lamar takes off, runs the ball, and runs 2 in, there's only so many touchdowns that are going to go around in any given game. And even in a one with a decent-sized total like this, there's only so much that's going to happen, and especially if some of that happens on the ground, clock's going to get chewed up with those plays, et cetera, more so than with passing. So he's a little bit more limiting to his own stack as far as the downstream effect if he's not throwing touchdown passes than some of the other quarterbacks where it's just a Derek Carr, let's say. There's very little risk that Derek Carr is going to take touchdowns away from his receivers. Alvin Kamara might, Taysom Hill might, but Derek Carr probably not. So it's just something to keep in mind. Baltimore maybe works a little bit more as a thin stack. On the Dallas side, CD pulling in an 11.9 yard ADOT. He scored a touchdown so far, 33.7% of the air yards on 8.5 looks a game. CeeDee Lamb, he's very, very high end up at the top of the wide receiver board basically every week. Last week it was 4 catches and 90 yards and a touchdown. Week 1, 5 for 61 and no touchdown. No issues with playing him. It's just, decent Baltimore defense in all things on the other side of it. Jake Ferguson missed last week, should be back this week. He's off the injury report already. In week 1, he caught 3 of 5 targets for just 15 yards, but he is a premium tight end option who can draw some decent target volume, definitely draws red zone attention in this offense. So I'm always happy to get to some Jake Ferguson, and honestly, he's kind of cheap. $4,500 on DraftKings feels a little light. Yeah, 5.5 on DK, 6.4 on FanDuel. Not bad at all for price-wise for Ferguson. Brandon Cooks is an effective enough wide receiver option that you can go to him in stacks. You can stack him alongside CeeDee Lamb. He's not a great direct pivot off of CeeDee Lamb. He's limited as far as the volume goes most weeks. Just 2 targets last week. He played 54% of the snaps, he played 54 snaps, ran routes on 35 of them. Week 1, he played 47 snaps, ran route on 26% of them, or 26 of them, was targeted on 26.9% of the routes run that week, but only 5.7% of the routes he ran. He was targeted on 2 of his 35 routes in week 2. So you can see some of the volume-based limitations there when it comes to Brandon Cooks, but he's definitely capable, and he does get some looks in the red zone from time to time. Got 1 look in the red zone in week 1. Or carry in the red zone, excuse me. Ran the ball once each week. Once the red zone carry was was for -3 yards in week 2. And then they are working Jalen Tolbert, who we were just talking about, into the offense a little bit. 6 of 9 catches for 82 yards, no touchdown in week 2. Was much more limited, ran 21 routes, but was only targeted twice in week 1. Caught one of them for 12 yards. On the ground, it leaned more toward Rico Dowdle in week 2. I don't know why I didn't put these two guys next to each other. In week 2, Zeke picked up 6 carries and 3 targets. He caught 2 of the targets. That was after a 10-carry, 2-target week 1. Dowdle had 7 carries and caught 4 of 5 passes, so slightly more. It was a 29-26 snap share. So they are basically splitting the job. But I think as time goes on, it's going to lean a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more toward Rico Dowdle because he's the younger and the just flat out better of these two players now. Tickle in my throat. Dowdle putting up 3.7 yards per attempt. Zeke right there, though, at 3.5 yards per attempt so far. Zeke's got the rushing touchdown between the two. They've both been targeted a little bit. On a basically even split so far, it makes me not really like either of them. That tends to be how I handle these situations. And Dowdle lands just 23rd, 22nd, and 70th by points per dollar somehow on DraftKings. That's uniquely high. 4,810 points. What is Zeke? Zeke's 5,500 for 8 points. How the hell did that happen? That's not correct. I gotta look at that number. Something screwy in that ranking number. Dowdle shouldn't be 70 at 4,800 with a 10 projection, when Zeke at 55 and an 8 projection is 29. That doesn't make sense. I'll have to give that a look. Not going to deal with it now. Down the depth chart for Dallas, you've just got, Turpin handles some kick returns. Deuce Vaughn has gotten a couple of touches here and there. He carried the ball 4 times in week 2 for 11 yards. He caught 1 pass that week, 1 of 1 for 6 more yards. But we're not talking about a heavily involved player. He saw 9 snaps with the offense, did run 5 routes, but was only targeted the 1 time and then had the 4 carries. It's very, very limited. Not somebody you're throwing a dart on for DFS purposes. Nobody else really down the board here makes much sense. Most likely 100-yard player from this, or most likely bonus player, probably CeeDee. I think he makes the most sense for that role. If you want one from each side, then, obviously it's Zay on the other side. But Lamar is definitely a contender to qualify for the bonus in multiple ways, honestly. But it's probably CeeDee as your biggest bet at a bonus. Ugly one. Let me start. So I talked about it just before. I do like the passing attack from Vegas in this one. I think that gets interesting, which doesn't really make me comfortable because it means I'm telling people that they should go play Gardner Minshew, which, there's probably better quarterbacks out there. So far, though, he's going up against a team that's, let's see, they're allowing 36.5 points per game, like real life points. That ranks 32nd in football. They've allowed 364 yards per game. That ranks 25th. They're allowing 0.575 points per play to the opposing team. That's a fun one. 5.7 yards per play overall. Opposing teams have scored 83.3% of the time they've been in the red zone over weeks 1 and 2. 4 touchdowns a game allowed. Really speaks to me that Vegas is going to be able to do whatever they want against this Carolina team. As far as the pass defense goes so far, against teams that have only thrown the ball 36% of the time so far, Carolina has allowed 7.5 yards per pass attempt, 164.5 yards per game, which ranks 10th overall, but that's on the second ranked 22 pass attempts per game from opponents. I'm very interested in the yards per pass that they've allowed, the total that they've allowed, the fact that they've generated a 4.35% sack rate, which ranks 29th, and the fact that Vegas has been throwing the ball as much as they have early on. I mentioned it before. So far to start the season, Vegas has thrown the ball 67.23% of the time, run the ball 32.7% of the time. So that's the reverse, basically, of what Carolina's faced so far. I think that will come more even for Vegas this week because teams are running against Carolina because, one, you can, and two, that's the quickest way to get through the game and get it over with when you know you're going to win. So it makes sense that teams have been running a lot against Carolina and not throwing quite as much. But with Vegas leaning so heavily pass, I do think it favors a few additional pass attempts for this team coming in. I do like two of their receivers. I mean, it's not a big stretch to say that you like Davante Adams, but I actually was drafting Jacoby Myers. I think he's downright interesting as a receiver. I think he falls into the end zone a fair amount of the time. So I can get there. He hasn't been that interesting over the first 2 weeks, just 3 catches for 61 in week 1, 4 catches for 29 in week 2, targeted 3 and 5 times through those games. So definitely needs to start making some things happen, but he's out there running 30 plus routes a week and drawing at least a reasonable target share as the true number 2 in this offense. And he plays with Davante Adams, who's still one of the premier receivers in the league. Davante caught 9 of 12 last week, put up 110 yards and a touchdown, 9.2 yards per target. Targeted 30% of his of the time on his 39 routes run. Ran 38 routes in week 1. So, super high volume, true wide receiver 1. Medium volume, doesn't need a ton of looks to have success, but probably is a little touchdown dependent wide receiver 2 in Jacoby Myers. And then a super high-end rookie tight end who's coming off of a 9-catch, 98-yard game. He caught 9 of 9 in week 2 for 98. Didn't get in the end zone. Targeted once in the red zone, but that's a very high-end game for a player in just his second week. He played 41 snaps, ran 28 routes, was targeted on 32% of the routes he ran. In week 1, he ran 28 routes, the exact same number of routes, drew 8 targets, caught 6 of them for 58 yards. So he has been a fixture in their offense over weeks 1 and 2, and they took him in the first round. They took him with a high-end pick because they wanted a high-end tight end. He is a very interesting kid. 54.63, he rates 1 by points per dollar at the tight end position, 3 by just raw points across sites. Vegas defense on top of this offense, also kind of interesting. They land 2nd by points, 8th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 10th by points per dollar on FanDuel because they're priced up for facing this opponent. But they project out great. This is going to be a different version of this opponent. It is Andy Dalton, not Bryce Young at the quarterback position. We do have to give them at least a little bit of leeway for that. We talked about Andy the other day. It's been a minute. He played one significant week last year. Threw 58 pass attempts against Seattle in week 3. Completed 361 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, that's a tremendous performance, and if you get that at low cost against this Vegas defense, you're going to be burnt if you played the defense, and you're probably going to have wanted Andy Dalton. As far as actual numbers go, though, I mean, 2022, he threw 378 passes with New Orleans, racked up 2,800 yards through 18 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, 7.6 yards per pass attempt. It's a mediocre 14 games. 8 games the year before that, 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, nothing special. Last time he threw for 3,000 yards was 2019, and he only threw 16 touchdowns and 14 interceptions that year. 21 touchdowns in 2018 against 11 interceptions. And his track record goes back to 2011. His best year was 2013. That's a long time ago now, especially in NFL years. That's a long, long time. He's got weapons. Deontay's a talented guy. The actual output, the quality that you get for those raw skills kind of comes and goes. He doesn't land too poorly on the board by points per dollar, though. 14th on DraftKings is definitely playable. 23rd puts you in the, we're getting 3 wide receivers per lineup. So, I mean, there's definitely shares to go around. So those guys are all going to be at least somewhat relevant. It's the same thing for Adam Thielen. He drops into the 40 range, but that does still make him playable under the right conditions. Very touchdown dependent for Thielen. Johnson drew 6 targets each of the first 2 weeks. He's caught 5 of 12 so far. He hasn't gained more than 20 yards in a game. Adam Thielen gained 49 yards on 3 catches in week 1, caught 3 of 4, caught 2 of 3 in week 2 for 20 yards. But apparently, presumably, the ball's going to be delivered a little bit more effectively by Andy Dalton. Xavier Legette, semi-interesting rookie. He ran 22 routes and drew 7 targets, 31.8% of his routes he was targeted on in week 1. Caught 4 balls for 35 yards. It's not a terrible debut. Didn't get in the end zone, didn't really do anything special or unique, but then came out in week 2, ran 14 routes, played 20 snaps. That's down from 32 that he played the first week and went untargeted. Not exactly the best second week there, and didn't really earn not getting a single look. I talked about not liking Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, and that's really, really the case. Hubbard carried the ball 10 times for 64 yards last time out, caught 4 passes for 4 or 5 for 12 yards, hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. Miles Sanders carried the ball 7 times, 20 yards, caught 3 passes for 5 yards. He's gaining 1.7 yards per target and very limited yards per rush attempt. 3.5 yards per rush attempt. Hubbard at least is gaining 4.9 yards per attempt. It amounts to 39 yards a game, and again, he hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. He's bouncing off people a little bit, though. 3.3 yard after contact. That's per attempt. That's not terrible. I just feel like we've gone to that well so many different times. How many times have we really succeeded? I think he's had like one big game that I can remember. Not that that's predictive, obviously. But after a certain amount of times, it starts to lean that way. NFL's small sample. Greatly prefer the Vegas side in this one. There's not much I would consider from the Carolina side. Down depth chart, you're dealing with nothing. I mean, the Mingos of the world and their messy tight end situation. Tommy Tremble was not active the first week. Played the second week, played 22 snaps, caught 3 passes on 4 targets over his 11 routes run. Jatavian Sanders played 23 snaps, caught 2 passes on 2 targets in 13 routes. I feel like we're getting desperate if we roster either of those guys at tight end. Downboard for Vegas. I didn't talk about Trey Tucker. Tucker caught 2 of 2 for just 13 yards, 2 of 3 in week 1 for 22 yards. Just a very limited but very cheap receiver. What you'd be interested in is any opportunity to get downfield with this team that's not the obvious guys. Really, it's been limited to non-existent. So it is just kind of the straightforward Devontae, Jacoby, drawing the deepest targets. Yeah. Not much to work with. Not much meat on the bone with a 3.4 yard ADOT, 4.63 yards percent of the air yards, 2.5 targets a game. You get a couple targets for Alexander Madison. He's also carried the ball a couple of times a game, but limited production. You're really not stretching that far for Alexander Madison. Zamir on the other side's carried the ball 11 times for 30 a game for 34 yards a game. Failed to get in the end zone. He's drawn a couple of targets behind the line of scrimmage, but failed to really produce anything on them. Behind that, it's just backups with Abdullah, the 2 tight ends down here, DJ Turner. So really, it is the straightforward, obvious looks from the Vegas side of this one. Your most likely bonus guy is definitely Devontae Adams in this game. No doubt about it. What are you guys talking about? No, Trey, not crazy. Between the two, I would probably lean Thompson and just hope the skill players get him there. Thompson's got more guys that you can just, I can throw the ball 2 yards to to Tyreek, and then Tyreek takes it to the other 98 and makes me look good in the fantasy score. So I would lean that way. Depends on the size of the field, but a large field GPP, there's nothing wrong with it. It's definitely going to be a lower owned approach, and it gains you some leverage while still sticking with even on the Carolina side. Once upon a time, I would have been a bigger believer in Andy Dalton's ability to succeed in this spot. It's just, again, we're getting long in the tooth. But I don't think Deontay's a bad weapon. I've talked about Adam Thielen a number of times and his size and just what a good red zone target he is. So I can see Adam Thielen falling in the end zone with 2 touchdown passes in his hands and gaining less than 20 yards. It's that kind of a thing. But as far as the overall quality, it leans Thompson to me. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fine combo to go with. You could definitely see that little dump out pass to A-Chain, and he takes off with it, same kind of a thing. And he's obviously also got the significant rush upside this week. We'll get to that one. Hit the like and subscribe if you're just getting here. Check out our guys over at acemind.io if you're just getting here. If you're not familiar with them, promo code RotoScouts all in caps, 20% off your first month over there. All the rankings, projections are up on the site. They'll change between right now and tomorrow. After this show, I'm going to get on the game notes. I'll update all the game notes, some new content in the Groups and Optimizers article, so always keep an eye on things as they hit the site. Everything's constantly changing. Caleb Williams at the top of the board really has not been good over weeks 1 and 2. Definitely took a little bit of the wind out of the sails of a lot of enthusiastic Bears fans, I think, coming right out of the gate. Week 1, 14 of 29 for 93 yards. Week 2, 23 of 37 for 174. 2 interceptions, no touchdowns either week. Ran for 44 yards. That's an 8.8 yard per carry in week 2. It's a little bit of an improvement for him. All the tools are there. I don't think anybody questions it yet. It hasn't been pretty, but I don't think we get too skeptical. Ranks 18, 17, and 19 across quarterback across sites. The Bears stack doesn't really rank out all that well. 18, 17, 21, 21 across sites. I do think they're entirely skippable this week. A few darts if you're playing 150 in a large field GPP is perfectly fine. You grab some Caleb and pair him with DJ Moore, pair him with Roman Dunze. I don't love the depth options. There's not much to work with there. But maybe if you're getting carried away with some Bears stacks, you could go down to like a DeAndre Carter, I guess. At least gets decent shots down the field on a 14.5 yard average depth of target with a quarterback who's been shaky in delivering the ball so far. He's targeted 3 times a game. He's caught 2 passes a game, 19 yards a game. Failed to get in the end zone yet, but maybe that's an interesting depth receiver if you're looking to get really, really cheap and take some shots with a bunch of Bears stacks. But if you're building one Bears stack, you're probably just going up toward the more obvious guys. Rome's gotten 4.5 looks. Week 1, that was 4 targets. Week 2, that was 5 targets. He caught 1 in week 1 for 11 yards. He caught 2 in week 2 for 33 yards. So if every week he catches twice as many passes and gains 3 times as many yards as the previous week, we're in business this week. All right? 4 catches, 99 yards this week. Take it. Might get him in the end zone. I'm getting all kinds of fundraising texts. I'm on like every list for both parties. I like to see what everybody's up to. But this time of year, it just melts my phone with, I need your money. I'm going to be here. I need your money. Please, we need your money. Take your money from them and give it to us. We won't get political. You guys know, I think, for the most part, know where I stand. But we don't need to get into that. Let's keep talking football. So, yeah, Rome is just, moderately interesting just because they've got a ton of draft capital in him. He's obviously a very talented kid. His ability to catch Caleb's passes has been in question so far. There's been a little bit of volume there, and I think they go right back to that 4, 5, 6 kind of target range for him again. No issues with going to him. He's drawn a 9.4 yard ADOT. It's reasonable. DJ is the prime target, 9.2 yard ADOT, 9 targets a game so far. That amounts to 10 targets last week, 6 catches, 53 yards. In week 1, he caught 5, but just 36 yards. Not anything interesting out of DJ yet, but we all know how good he is. He just got paid. Cole Kmet's just kind of a mix and match tight end, drawing 3 targets a game. You get a little bit of targeting through, Gerald Everett's picked up a couple. DeAndre Carter I talked about with a couple of deep shots so far. Khalil Herbert will get a look here and there. DeAndre Swift will get a few looks. He's seen 3 targets a game, picking up 2 of them a game for 12 yards, but catching most of it behind the line of scrimmage with a negative ADOT. So has to make things happen, obviously, after that. On the ground, Swift has carried the ball 12 times a game, gaining just 2 yards per attempt, though. 24 yards a game is significantly unimpressive. Hasn't been in the end zone, unsurprisingly. We did have Khalil Herbert get involved last week. Scored a touchdown. Herbert's week amounted to 2 carries for 3 yards and a touchdown. He also caught 2 passes, 2 of 2 targets for 4 yards. That is not a big day. That amounts to 4 potential touches, 4 touches overall. He just happened to score a touchdown. But even with the touchdown there, that was not like a slate bending event because it was so low volume. You do still need, even if you get the touchdown score, if it comes with 2 yards and 1 carry or 2, couple carries here or there, you do need to pile up stats still on top of touchdowns. It's not just a touchdown and thank you very much, like with the cheap home run in baseball, where a lot of the time, all right, that $2,200 shortstop that I put in, speaking of which, went out and hit a 2-run homer. That's all I needed. That doesn't really work as well the same way in football. I forgot to update those last lineups. Oh, no Jazz Chisholm for the Yankees tonight. I was correct that John Birdie got into the lineup, but not having Jazz is annoying. Okay, let's see. I can move you any other third. Oh, the little Yankees and D-backs stack tonight. Just went straight forward. So move Eugenio from util to third, and now I've got $3,700 to spend on whoever. Is there anything to upgrade? I could probably upgrade that spot then. Just go fucking Volpe. And then, this is exciting, isn't it? And then I get Dominguez at the util. That's fine. All right. I changed John Birdie into Anthony Volpe, and we put Dominguez in there. Oh, although, did Soto make the lineup? Ah, Soto is playing. Should just do that. Go back to Birdie. Can that work? Hang in there, guys. Almost done with this. Yeah, and then I'll just go a different direction instead of Dominguez. We can go Ozzy. I don't really like that. You know what? Leave it alone. Stick with the Volpe and Dominguez one. Hope for the best. That lineup's not going to win anyway. It's got Dane Dunning in the mound. If he even pitches. Did Dunning actually pitch? That game hasn't started yet. On the indie side of this one, as far as depth options go, by the way, I really see no need with the Rashawn Johnsons and Tyler Scotts and Velus Jones Jr.'s of the world. Velus Jones is a skill guy. If he ever got into a bigger role, he's one to watch. I do think he's got some exciting big playability, but just very limited so far. Richardson, super interesting quarterback. Going to be basically week in, week out with the skill set that he's got. Definitely intriguing for DFS scoring. Capable of running the ball. Capable of firing the ball 60 yards downfield in the air. In week 2, threw 3 interceptions, which is concerning, obviously. 204 yards and a touchdown. Ran for 37 yards on 4 carries. He carried the ball 6 times for 56 and a touchdown in week 1. Also threw 2 touchdown passes. Completed 9 of 19 for 212 yards. The volume was up in week 2 through the air. Against Green Bay, he threw 34 passes versus the 19 that he threw in week 1 against Houston. Definitely big playability. He's got some good receivers to work with in Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, Adonai Mitchell looks like the real deal. So pretty deep receiving core here. Downs is going to be back. He was out with an ankle, but off the injury report. So he was their number 2 receiver last year. Picked up 700 and change yards through the air. So seems pretty reasonable as a target there. And then in terms of Pittman, Alec Pierce, the guys who've been out there over weeks 1 and 2. Drawing significant target volume for Pittman on a 10.8-yard A-dot. Pierce, monster downfield target at 22.5-yard A-dot, 33.5% of the air yard share. Adonai Mitchell, again, another just big downfield target at 18.9 yards on the A-dot, 25.34% of the air yard share. Even Ashton Doolin is a cheap dart throw all the way down the bottom, picked up 14.3 yards as an A-dot. He scored a touchdown in week 1. That was just a total dart throw shot with Josh Downs out. I think we're probably limiting ourselves to these 4 in terms of the wideouts, but all 4 guys are going to be interesting. So it's a deep receiving core, which is good because the tight end position is kind of a mess. Basically, everybody just drawing a target a week, playing quarter or a third of the snaps. It's kind of messy at the tight end spot for this team. Pittman caught 4 balls in week 1, 3 in week 2, is yet to make any noise out there, but was targeted 8 times and 7 times across those games. Adonai was targeted 5 times and 4 times. He caught 1 ball in each game. It's going to happen when you're taking big shots down the field, though. A lot of incomplete passes, but we'll take those home runs. Consider them like a 3 true outcomes kind of a team, to continue baseball analogies. Still in baseball mode. Right, but you've got like a low batting average, but big home run upside. And then you get the equivalent of walks out of having a pretty good high volume running back in Jonathan Taylor, who's carried the ball 14 times a game, 75.5 yards a game so far, putting up 3.8 yards before contact per attempt is pretty solid, 1.6 after. Scored a touchdown already. Gained 100 yards on just 12 carries in week 2. Also caught 2 of 4 for another 32 yards, so 135 yards from scrimmage. His touchdown came in week 1. He had 16 carries in week 1, just gained 48 yards against Houston. Was more effective on fewer carries in week 2. Definitely going to be an interesting running back. For the money, he lands as RB6-7 on DraftKings and RB6-6 across FanDuel. I think Taylor can stand alone. Go to him in some lineups where you're not stacking Richardson and receivers, and then use Richardson with the receiving core and primarily with the wideouts in stacks. Every now and then, I think it's an on-off type situation where every now and then, that was a term I was using for the first time in the group's article, by the way, with some of the running backs. I'm just saying, in parentheses, like sometimes previously I was saying large field for guys that are just like tournament dart throw receivers. So I'm saying on-off for some of the running backs where it's sometimes they will target them, sometimes they might not necessarily. You might not necessarily want them in stacks. Running backs do pick up, obviously, some correlation just with their offense churning their way down the field, just on the upside, the upside for touchdown potential. But the true correlation in DFS comes from the passing game more than in the rushing game. So you do need some targets for the running back. That's why Taylor lands as kind of an off-on, where in some crunches, some lineup builds, you leave him in the stack. Some others you take him out, so you get a good blend. And it's a perfect example. 0 targets in week 1, 4 targets last week. Off 1 week, on the next. I don't think you're taking any of the tight ends here. Granson the nominal lead, but not really. Outsnap the others 57% to 36 to 26. This is what I'm talking about. It's just so evenly split, and they're all drawing 1.5, 1 targets. The volume's just way too low. There's better tight end options across the slate. Top number 1, top potential bonus guy. I'll throw it in Taylor's direction again. I think that makes sense. And then DJ Moore probably on the other side. But for the game, it's probably Jonathan Taylor as your most likely bonus guy among the skill players. Really don't like this Denver team. Didn't catch that, Steven. Thanks for the note. Let me see. Yeah, Pittman officially questionable. Appreciate the note. It sounds like he's going to play. That might even have just been a day off, and they just put him on the injury report. They tacked him on the final. The note on RW is tacked him on the final week 3 practice report with back and calf injuries, which kept him out of drills on Friday. But the coach said should be able to play Sunday and would confirm beforehand, et cetera, et cetera. That feels more like a day off. Just, hey, we're not going to grind you down. Why didn't he practice today? His back is a little sore. Because he's carrying the damn team. Bo Nix, not a good option. Just a 40.5 point total in this game to begin with. Tampa Bay, pretty big favorites at 6.5 points. Nix really hasn't looked that good. Two picks in each game. Did complete 20 of 35 in week 2, 26 of 42 in week 1, so the volume is great. Love to have any quarterback throwing 42 times a game, 35 times a game. 35 is like the number I'm typically looking for from that makes you a high-end, high-potential quarterback. 42 is outstanding, but he only completed 138 yards, 3.3 yards per pass attempt on those 42 passes. 246 in week 2 is a little bit better, 7 yards per attempt, but 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions is kind of disappointing. He's run the ball a handful of times both games. He did rush the ball into the end zone in week 1, and we're very proud of him for that. So far, that's the career highlight. He's got decent weapons in Cortland Sutton. Both running backs are capable guys, but it just kind of falls apart around the quarterback play. Nobody really ranks out all that well. For the running back spot, running backs in the 20s are borderline playable at the absolute best. Sutton probably sneaks into some playability. He ranks in the 30s across the board, slips up to 28th by points per dollar value on FanDuel. If he sees anything like the week 1 targeting, he's interesting. And this is where he's going to live and die. 12 targets in week 1. He only caught 4 of them for 38 yards, but if you throw them all 12 times, for one, it's probably mostly not his fault that those passes weren't delivered. But for 2, if you throw 12 balls in his direction, most weeks he's probably going to come away with more than 4 of them. Was targeted in the red zone twice in week 1, was targeted in the red zone 3 times in week 2. 4 targets overall, came away with just 1 catch for 26 yards and no touchdown. But again, not necessarily his fault if you watch some of those passes. Josh Reynolds, mix and match quality. He did catch 4 passes for 93 yards in week 2. 4 of 5, had a decent 18.6 yards per target, but a limited receiver. Decent downfield looks, I guess. 6.5 targets a game overall, an 11.9 yard ADOT, 28% of the air yard share, 13.1 yard ADOT, and 37% of the air yards going in Cortland Sutton's direction. So they are taking not the deepest of shots, but those are respectable downfield pass attempts. They're just not completing enough of them. On the ground, McLaughlin carried the ball 3 times on his 17 snaps with the offense last week. He went untargeted. Javonte carried the ball 11 times on 35 snaps with the offense. He also ran 21 routes and was targeted on 5 of them. Caught all 5 passes for 48 yards. So Javonte's pulled into the lead as the clearly more involved running back. McLaughlin does still have big playability. He's running some routes. He ran 13 routes week 1. He ran 14 routes, but again, went untargeted in week 2. It does primarily look like they're going to be using him as the receiving back, though. He ran routes on 14 of 17 snaps in week 2, and then carried the ball the other 3 times. So mostly third down work, mostly passing game work for McLaughlin. Dulcich drawing a decent target share for a tight end, 5.5 targets a game. That was 3 in week 1, 8 in week 2. Has done nothing with him. 2 catches for 12 yards, 3 catches for 16 yards, no touchdowns. Devon Villay missed week 2. He caught 8 balls in 8 of 8 for 39 yards in week 1. If he comes back to similar volume, he'd be a value-based target, but again, you're talking about a quarterback that needs to deliver him the ball. They were throwing him just little dink and dunk passes, 2.1 yard average depth of target in that game. So catching the ball just, at or about the line of scrimmage and trying to make something happen with it, and hasn't really done much of that. If I remember correctly, at one point he was going to be returning kicks and punts as well, so presumably that kind of a skill set. Don't know the player all that well. Marvin Mims just drew 2 targets last week, caught one of them, 1 target in week 1. Extraordinarily limited receiver and limited talent. He's basically riding on one big play that he made. Much, much better looking on the Tampa Bay side. Baker, looking like a premium quarterback. He ranks 9th on both sides by points, 7th and 10th by points per dollar. Successful first couple of weeks. Week 1 obviously had the monster 289 yards and 4 touchdowns. Week 2 dropped down to just 19 pass attempts, 185 yards, threw a touchdown, threw an interception. He was just okay. He also ran the ball in for a touchdown, five carries for 34 yards. It's not really a part of this game, but it's nice to watch him bust one in for a touchdown every now and then for some bonus scoring. I like him to get up to and around this median again. I love his connection with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think they're 2 very, very good receivers. Evans rates out at 14 on raw points, 18 on raw points by Godwin, but Godwin steps ahead slightly on points per dollar as the much more affordable. 72 versus 65 on DraftKings, 83 versus 66 on FanDuel. Uniquely inexpensive on the FanDuel slate. Either way you want to go with that pairing, or if you want them both, it paid off in week 1. The winning lineups had Baker plus Evans plus Godwin. Rachaad White, Bucky Irving. Again, Rachaad White does tend to get by on volume. 15 carries and 6 catches on 6 targets in week 1 put him at 21 touches. He gained 31 yards on the ground, but 75 through the air, so it looked like an okay game. Week 2, 10 carries, just caught 1 of 1 through the air. 18 yards rushing, 5 yards receiving. It's a totally empty game. Kind of exposed. You got production out of Bucky Irving both weeks. 9 carries for 62. Also caught 2 of 3 for 14 yards in week 1. Carried the ball just 7 times in week 2, 22 yards, and did not come away with a target despite running 8 routes. But I continue to think that he's the more talented running back. I continue to think that it's only a matter of time before he takes this job away. He does everything that Rachaad White does, and he does it a little bit better in terms of the quality of the runs. So I've got them fairly close. If you need a cheap running back, I think Bucky's at least on the board. But there's other guys with bigger opportunities, like Carson Steele and Bucky, I think are at the same price. And Steele's going to get clear volume where Bucky's just a question mark. McMillan's seen some looks. Just caught 1 of them each week. 3 targets week 1, 2 targets in week 2. Good downfield looks, though. 18.6 yard average depth of target compared to the 8.9, the 6.9 that Evans and Godwin are putting up. They're obviously drawing big air yard shares on volume, but most of the rest of it's gone right there. 31.8% despite just 2.5 targets a game. 18.6 yard ADOT. He's gotten in the end zone. That came in week 1. Caught 1 for 32 yards and a touchdown in week 1. Caught 1 for 21 yards and no touchdown in week 2. Otten is just kind of a mix and match tight end. He's seen 2 targets so far. Operates right around the line of scrimmage. Trey Palmer's only gotten minimally involved. He played both weeks. He saw 20 snaps with the offense in week 1, 9 snaps with the offense in week 2, played on special teams both weeks, drew both of his targets in week 1, caught 1 of them for 19 yards and no impact whatsoever despite running 6 routes. Don't really think you're stretching that far for Trey Palmer unless you're building, 50 Tampa stacks. Then maybe he's in there. That's an exaggeration, but he's not in my first, 5 Tampa stacks. Maybe he makes the 5th one. He's probably not in the first 4. Most likely 100-yard receiver or 100-yard bonus player. I think we got to give it to Chris Godwin again. He's been racking up the yardage early. It's 1-1A with Evans and Godwin. Slight lean for Godwin for the yardage. Slight lean for Evans if I had a gun to my head and had to pick the touchdown, though. But bonus would probably go Godwin, most likely bonus from this game. Like the Tampa Bay side, don't really like anything from the Denver side. Definitely a spot where you can build Tampa stacks and not really worry about the run back play. You're just getting what you're getting out of Tampa Bay. I don't really see a lot of situations where this game is huge and Denver hangs with Tampa Bay for all that long. So I think you can forego the run back play more often than not. Love this game and its 52-point total. Some good quarterbacks on both sides. Some very good skill players on both sides. A breath of fresh air in this game. Kyler lands 4-9 and 5-9 across sites at the quarterback spot. Jared Goff not far behind 8-8 and 8-4. Significant point per dollar value on FanDuel at 7,500. Between the two teams, boy, it's really close. I mean, they both got ultra premium tight ends. They've both got, I'm going to do Marvin a solid here and say true A number one type wide receivers. Capable runners. Reasonable depth options at the wideout position. The fact that Detroit doubles up the running backs and then comes back with Jameson Williams as their next man in, where the Cards are really doing that with like James Conner on his own and then Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch. That's where it gets a little bit thin. That's where it favors Detroit a little bit. Detroit favored by just 2.5 on the road, but it's not a giant point spread. So Vegas likes this one to stay pretty close. It seems like it's got all the makings of a shootout. I like the opportunity for a lot of scoring through the air in this one. 6.6 yards per pass attempt so far this season for Arizona, ranks 18th. 8.3 yards per pass attempt. For Detroit, was 18th. 8.3 yards per pass attempt for Arizona is 31st out of 32 teams. So definitely two targetable teams through the air. A lot to work with in the passing attack. Trey McBride ranks number 1 by points, 3rd and 2nd by value across sites at the tight end spot. And then Sammy Laporta, number 2 by points, 6 and 3 by value. At the wideout, Marvin, number 8 by points across sites, 13 and 8 by points per dollar. And then Amon-Ra, number 3 and 4 by points, number 12 and 22 by points per dollar value. But yeah, you can definitely see it on the running back spot. Not only do both Montgomery and Gibbs outrank James Conner on their own, there's 2 of them. It's like that line in The Social Network. If I wanted to beat him up, I wouldn't have to hire anybody. I'm 6'5", 220, and there's 2 of me. It's kind of like what the Lions have at running back here. They've also got Jameson Williams, who lands 26-23 and 23-21 across sites. The defense doesn't look that great. It's the one downer here. The Cards defense actually looks minorly playable for just 2,300 as a value option on DraftKings, but probably not. Just a points per dollar thing sticking out there. In terms of putting some numbers on this thing, at the running back spot, I think it's an interesting spot to start with Detroit. 5.2 yards per rush attempt gain for Gibbs so far on his 12 carries a game. He's putting up 62 yards a game. He's gotten in the end zone on the ground once. 2 yards before contact, 3.1 after. David Montgomery right behind him. 14 carries a game, slightly out touching him in terms of carries. Gaining 63 yards a game, 4.5 per attempt. 2 yards before contact, exactly the same. A little bit less after contact, 2.5 yards after contact, but still quite good. Scored twice on the ground so far. Gibbs is the more involved in the passing attack, 6.5 targets a game versus the 2.5 that have gone in Montgomery's direction. So you do get a little bit of edge there if you really have to try and figure out which one of these guys is going to be more involved. But ultimately, it boiled down to 17 potential touches, 15 actual touches week 1, 20 potential, 20 actual week 2 for Jahmyr Gibbs. And then 18 potential, 18 actual, and 15 potential, 15 actual for David Montgomery. So slight favorite on the passing volume for Gibbs, but it's very, very close. Either one of these running backs is playable. They project out very similarly. They both have pretty significant touchdown upside and tons of skill. If this team's ahead and they're trying to burn some clock, you pick up a little advantage with Montgomery in that situation. A lot of back and forth between these two running backs. If you had to decide between the two and you had infinite money, it's Gibbs. But it's very close. Probably closer than any other situation. And probably, with apologies to Mostert and A-Chain, probably the most playable two-man group in football right now. I think either way, not together necessarily. I think with what these two running backs do, it's not exactly as playable together as like that explosive Mostert A-Chain combo that we saw prove that theory last year. Still not my favorite thing to do is play two running backs from the same team. That's something I still basically block out by rule. But what I am saying is that in an either-or sense, these guys are more playable than most other tandems. Jameson's gotten a couple looks on the ground, a couple little trick plays. Khalif Raymond's pick one up of that ilk as well. But obviously those are not significant rushers. What we have seen is monster target volume so far for Jameson, which is great. Highly skilled guy getting back into the swing here and really involved over the first couple of weeks. 9 targets week 1, 11 targets week 2. He caught 5 each week, 121 yards and a touchdown week 1, 79 yards, no touchdown week 2. But that's significant involvement, significant opportunity and involvement and downfield looks. 12.8 yard ADOT, 46.72% of the air yards so far. Outpacing Amon-Ra in both departments. Amon-Ra still seeing tons of volume. No issues with the player. Just 6 targets in week 1, but it averaged out because he saw 18 targets in week 2. Caught 11 of them for 119. No touchdown. Only had 3 catches for 13 yards in that disappointing week 1. But I think we snapped right back into the mix. It was just a weird outlier game week 1. So I don't think we worry about that at all. I think we just take our 18 targets from last week and call it good enough and run with it. Samuel Laporta, 5 targets week 1, 3 targets in week 2. Definitely should see an uptick in volume here, especially with the the duel of the 2 super high-end tight ends here. Not that we're chasing narratives necessarily, but I could see both of these guys getting a decent amount of volume here. Laporta's excellent at the position, just hasn't provided much so far this year, but coming into this game ranks out great and one of the most highly playable options at his position. Raymond is limited. He did catch 3 balls for 27 yards, was targeted 4 times in week 2. In week 1, he just had that carry. 1 carry for 12 yards went untargeted. That was despite running 20 routes on 37 snaps. In week 2, he ran 23 routes, played 30 snaps. So he actually got targeted in that one. Mix and match quality at best. Timmy Patrick didn't play week 1, was out there for week 2. 32 snaps with the offense, ran 20 routes, was targeted 4 times, caught 2 of them for 12 yards. Pretty minimal involvement there. Nobody else is all that relevant on that side. And then your big guy, Marvin, had a day. The hell is this team? There they are. Marvin drew 8 targets, put up 130 yards and 2 touchdowns on 4 catches. Most of that work came in the first half of that game. Was a monster through the first half. Cooled off a little bit as time went on, but that was a day just on its own. Which is good because in week 1 he only caught 1 pass for 4 yards. So across the 2 he's been fine. 2 touchdowns so far in his 2 games. Kid definitely looks special. 16.5 yard ADOT, 44.69% of the air yards so far. They're obviously giving him some looks. He was their prized draft pick. It makes all the sense in the world. Trey McBride, high-end tight end. He drew 9 targets week 1, 6 targets week 2, caught 5 and 6 of them. Hasn't gotten in the end zone yet, but it's only a matter of time with this receiver. 7.2 yard ADOT. He's effective down the field. He's effective over the middle. Does everything a tight end needs to do. James Conner carrying the ball 18.5 times a game. Has put up 86 yards a game. Got in the end zone twice. 122 yards and a touchdown in week 2 on 21 carries. Was targeted just once. But that's decent volume. If he's going to see 20 carries a week, I'm a buyer on James Conner. I just don't know that we get that same volume every week. Week 1, he carried the ball 16 times, caught 3 of 4 targets. So again, that is 20 potential touches, 19 actual. I guess if I'm asking for just 20 touches, 20 potential touches, I got to put James Conner on the list of playable. Hasn't been bad so far. I just wasn't really a buyer 2.5 weeks ago. So I don't want to get roped in by 2 semi-decent games. But it's a player I've believed in over time. Just didn't know if we were going to see it this year. Wilson and Dortch, limited production on limited looks so far. 2 targets a game for Wilson. Caught 1 of them for a touchdown, but just 5 yards in week 1. No touchdown, 2 catches, 31 yards in week 2. And then Dortch, he drew 8 targets week 1, caught 6 of them for 47 yards, also carried the ball once for 4 yards, and then dropped back down to just 2 targets in week 2, went from 37 snaps week 1 to 21 snaps week 2. He's also questionable with a hammy, so pay attention to that. Limited action so far for Benson and DeMarcado down board. Benson's carried the ball 7 times a game. He's put up 11.5 yards. That was 11 carries last week for 10 yards total. Also caught 1 of 1 for 7 yards. 22 snaps. He did go up from 8 snaps week 1 to 22 snaps week 2, while DeMarcado dropped from 14 to 7. DeMarcado carried the ball twice for 46 yards, though. Broke one big play. No real appeal, even as mix and match dart throw type guys, though, down board. That's just something you don't do with running back. Running back, you always want to pay at least a little bit and secure some volume, or at least the idea of volume. Again, if you want to go cheap at running back and you're buying into a situation where it's like, all right, I think there's a lane for that guy because the starter is out. He's the dynamic, explosive kid. Yeah, they're saying this other guy's going to get the carries. Samaje Perine kind of, even though kid doesn't really apply. But you want to target a guy like that where there is the potential that, all right, he could surprise and pick up 12, 15 touches or 12, 15 potential touches rather than these guys that we know are going to carry the ball or touch the ball 2 or 3 times. It's just so limiting. It's more playable that way at the wide receiver position just by nature of the position with the downfield threats and everything. You can get away with the 3 or 4 target guys in those scenarios, and that's what you want to do with the value plays there is look for those deep threat, low cost, low volume, high scoring guys. Nobody else really to talk about. Moore, Pascal haven't been involved at all yet. Nobody down board. Most likely 100-yard guy out of this one, or most likely bonus guy, rather. It's got to be Amon-Ra. You can throw Marvin into that mix from the other side, of course. But I think it's clearly Amon-Ra. The other guy I would say is, the two-headed monster here, but I would lean it toward Gibbs. There's actually a lot of contenders, though, because Connor's been chasing it. He's been right around that level over the first couple of weeks. A lot of contenders in this one. I'll give it to Amon-Ra, though, most likely bonus. How we doing out there? Trey's getting a lot of Baker Goff and then a mix of everyone else in Sims. I like that. Don't mind that at all. A lot of that's going to depend on slight differences in what they've got them projected at, or I don't know if that's using my projections or Awesomeos, but it also very much depends on how they've got those things owned. And if you run different sims with the same numbers across sites and it's just a matter of the ownership's going to drive a lot of how those results look. Okay is asking Deontay 5.3K or Jawan Jennings 5.2 and saying competing with Ayuk and Mason. Deontay not competing with anyone, has QB upgrade. I am going to kind of agree with Power and lean Jawan Jennings in that one. I think it's close talent-wise, but I have a lot more faith in San Francisco's ability to, 1, call his number, 2, deliver him the ball. Not totally buying in on the Andy Dalton thing. It is an upgrade over what Bryce Young's given us so far at the quarterback position on that team. No question about it. But I'm not a total buyer on Dalton. And I wouldn't entirely say that Jawan Jennings is competing where Deontay's on his own, because Thielen's going to definitely draw looks in the red zone. If nothing else, he's going to get looks in the red zone. And they've also got Leggett drawing some attention. Where really Mason's going to get his on the ground. Jennings is going to be the clear number 2 in that offense alongside Ayuk. And I could see him getting a pretty significant volume because they're probably just going to be loading up on Ayuk. So for me, that leans Jennings a little bit. I think he'll be the more popular decision, though. So if ownership leverage means anything to you, there's nothing wrong with going Deontay here. And I do have enough faith in Andy Dalton that I can say that I would play Deontay across some lineups. I'll probably have some shares. But yeah, dangling over the pit of vipers on a rope that's going to get cut if I get it wrong, I think I lean toward Jennings. Which game were we on? We just did, Detroit, Arizona, right? We're on Green Bay, Tennessee. I went back and I lost track. Let me get that game up in the notes here. All right, so obviously for Green Bay, it's a major upgrade if they get Jordan Love. Malik Willis looked competent, but Jordan Love is legitimately good. So that's a huge upgrade for this offense. Just keep an eye on it. Week 1, 17 of 34, 260 yards, 2 touchdown passes. He's very good, not great yet, but ranks 11-11 on DraftKings, 11-7 on your FanDuel slate. Nice little piece of point per dollar upside with Jordan Love. I like Josh Jacobs a little bit more if Love doesn't play and Willis does. I think it just, kind of swings some volume in Jacobs' direction more likely than not. It's a low-end total overall, just 38.5 points, and Tennessee still favored by 3 in this game. Tennessee's defense has been pretty good so far. They rank 10th against the run and 2nd against the pass, 4 yards per attempt and 3.9 yards per attempt. That's going to change on the passing side. They're not going to allow less through the air than they do on the ground this season in a per attempt sense. But they have been pretty stout against both so far. So it's another little bit of a limiting factor there. Jacobs in week 2 carried the ball 32 times for 151 yards. That's what I'm talking about with the volume. That is a significant touch share. So that could repeat if it's Willis at the helm. But if it's Love, I think he dips back down. In week 1, he carried the ball just 16 times, caught 2 of 3 targets. I think you have more of that kind of a game. Still might amount to 20 potential touches. So I do still think he's in play, but it's not going to be 32 touches. Was untargeted on 9 routes in that. 45 snaps with the offense. Their multi-headed receiver core, I love everything about it. Jaden Reed as the top guy, but Christian Watson is 1A to his 1. Romeo Doubs, next man up, and then Dontavian Wicks adding a little bit of depth at a pretty broad spectrum of prices there. Doesn't get too much more appealing than that. And they spread the targets around and they mix up what's going on which week. The most reliable targeting, I do think, is Reed. Week 1, caught 4 of 6 for 138 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, caught 2 of 2 for 9 yards, but that was working with Willis. Week 1, Christian Watson caught 3 of 5, scored a touchdown, but only put up 13 yards. Went untargeted, ran just 9 routes despite playing 40 snaps in week 2. A little bit of weird output there. Romeo Doubs, and part of that is, he played all those snaps, but they ran the ball 32 times, as we saw with Josh Jacobs. So, that's part of why some of the route running was limited in week 2. Doubs was out there. He played 52 snaps. He only ran 16 routes. Was targeted 3 times, caught all 3 of them for 62 yards. Wicks played 34 snaps, ran 9 routes, was targeted 4 times. Caught 3 of them for 26 yards and a touchdown. Was targeted 3 times, but came up empty in week 1. Played 27 snaps, ran 14 routes. So basically everybody was out there running fewer routes in week 2 just because of how much they were keeping the ball on the ground and just trying to play through the game with Malik Willis. They definitely take to the air once again if it's Jordan Love. So big deciding factor in this game. As far as the tight end position, Tucker Kraft getting a little bit more of the volume than Luke Musgrave. It's close. He's definitely out snapping him. The route running was similar in week 2. Kraft ran way more routes in week 1. 55 snaps, ran 22 routes, drew 3 targets. In week 2, that was 53 snaps, just 9 routes, 2 targets. Musgrave, it was 15 with 8 routes run, 29 snaps with 6 routes run. 2 targets, 1 target. Limited volume either way, but it definitely favors Kraft. He's cheap, but doesn't exactly rank out well. This is the absolute outer boundaries of the township of playability. Tony Pollard on this side, 6,000, 6,800, a decent running back with some upside. Has had a couple of successful outings to start the season. Week 1, Pollard put up 82 yards and a touchdown. He also caught 3 of 4 for 12 yards. Week 2, 17 carries, 62 yards, no touchdown. Limited output on the ground, but he also caught 5 of 6 passes for 40 yards, so that put him over the century mark. It also put him over the threshold for potential touches and touches that we're looking for. they're going to feed him the ball that much, I am absolutely interested. He's also dealing with Tajay Spears as a potential multi-headed situation, but Tajay came up with an ankle injury. He's questionable to play. Did practice in full on Friday, but officially listed as questionable. Probably going to suit up, seems like anyway, but it might limit him overall. In week 1, he saw 27 snaps. He carried the ball 4 times. He also caught 4 of 4. Then in week 2, he only played 19 snaps, carried the ball 6 times, caught 2 of 2. But I think Pollard is, the established and clear-cut first banana in this offense, and dude's got a lot of skill. This is a guy everybody was excited about going into last year, and he dramatically disappointed, so everybody hated him coming into this year. I scooped him up late in basically every season-long draft, and I'm very happy I did. Went to him in week 1 successfully, at least considering him at fair pricing in week 3 here. 13-8 on DraftKings and 13-11 on FanDuel. I like him better than Spears, just with Spears dealing with the injury and significantly less volume share. And then I probably like him better than the passing game. I do like Calvin Ridley and I do like DeAndre Hopkins as individual talents. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm rushing off to roster them individually. I just don't love the Will Levis of it. I think he's just kind of meh. 19 of 28 in week 2 for 192, a touchdown and an interception, 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Week 1, 19 of 32 for 127, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, 4 yards per pass attempt. He's taken a 8.5 intended air yards per attempt, but only 3.6 air yards per attempt, 5.3 yards per attempt so far. He's the limiting factor in the passing attack. DeAndre hadn't been fully healthy over the first couple of weeks. In week 1, he played just 15 snaps, was on a complete pitch count, caught 1 of 1 for 8 yards on 9 routes. Opened up a little bit more, played 26 snaps with the offense week 2, ran 17 routes, drew 2 targets, caught 1 of them for 9 yards. Pretty limited so far. But assuming that he's a little bit more released this week, a couple more snaps, couple more opportunities, there's cheap upside there. Ridley's drawn 6.5 targets a game. Significant downfield action with a 24.5-yard ADOT. That's obviously where they're taking their big shots. Came away with a touchdown in week 2, 4 catches, 77 yards on 6 targets. 7 targets in week 1, 3 catches for 50 yards. Limited, not terrible in the week 1 game. You obviously need the score to get there, really. But some playability, and you got to love the touchdowns. Or the touchdown. And the deep threat. Oh, way to go, Dane Dunning. You've already given up a run. Jock Peterson home run. Down the depth chart for Tennessee, you're dealing with Tyler Boyd down here. 5 targets a game so far. 9.5-yard ADOT. That's amounted to 3 catches for 18 yards and 2 catches for 26 yards. Straight up 5 targets a game, though. I mean, there's a little volume there, and that's a guy that we've had for several years now as the third man in Cincinnati, and was just always a guy that would, kind of step into a role when you needed him, but was never outstanding. His career high 2,000-yard years, 2018, 2019, peaked at 90 catches, 1,046 yards and 5 TDs in 2019. But I mean, each of these subsequent years, 79 catches, 67, 58, 67 over the last 4 years. 4, 5, 5, and 2 touchdowns. It's been limited. It's been in a decline as he's gotten into the back end of his 20s. But that's still an effective receiver for a cheap price as a third man. It's just, again, you're very limited by Will Levis. So maybe just some value darts. This is the outer edges of playability here when you rank in the 49-55 area by points per dollar. Titans defense is on the board as far as a points per dollar defense option, though. 5th on DraftKings, 4th on FanDuel. They, again, have been pretty good this year so far. In terms of scoring defense, let's see, what have they done? Four sacks, no picks so far. generating just an 18.2% pressure rate. So they've been a little bit better at actually stopping opposing offenses than they have at creating fantasy points so far. On the other side of that one, Green Bay's been doing a little bit of scoring. 3 sacks, 5 picks already. Favorite thing out of this game? Best bonus opportunity? I'm giving it to Tony Pollard. I think on sheer volume, I think he's got a really good crack at it. Probably gets chewed up more often than not between just spreading the ball out with all of those targets for Green Bay, and they become more limited if it's Levis or if it's Willis, not Love. In that case, if it's Willis, I would say Jacobs becomes the most likely 100 bonus guy. If it's Love, then it's probably not anybody from the Packers. It becomes Tony Pollard. Put it that way. Titans are hard to run against. Agreed. Like this game a lot, mostly on the Houston side. Big CJ Stroud fan. Need him to step up and have a nice 300-yard, 4-touchdown kind of a day. Pull my fantasy team out of the doldrums early in the season here. But I love the receiving core that he works with Nico, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. We're talking about a little bit coming into the season who would be the true one for this team. I was saying I think it would be Diggs, considering they went and got him in the veteran pedigree and everything. Early on, looks like Nico's edged him out for the true number one, but Diggs has been extremely heavily involved. He's a very interesting, very capable receiver. A lot of touchdowns in his track record. Seems to have a little bit of early chemistry. Week 2, he caught 4 of 6 for 37 yards. In week 1, he caught 6 of 6 for 33 yards, but scored 2 touchdowns. That's the most important thing. 58 snaps, ran 33 routes in week 1, 49 snaps, but ran 31 routes, so no real volume change, no real opportunity change in week 2. Just out there making him run fewer sprints for the veteran, which I think makes some sense. The targets for Nico were 8 in week 1, where he caught 6 balls for 117 yards, and then was targeted 10 times in week 2. Came away with 8 of them for 135 yards and a touchdown. Nico's fantastic. Dell's been the low man so far. He caught just 3 of 7 in week 1 for 40 yards, no touchdown, and then in week 2 just caught 1 of 4 for -3 yards. He also carried the ball twice in week 1 and 3 times in week 2. So he's getting on, they're trying to get the ball in his hands, trying to get him engaged in the season, and he's obviously a very dynamic kid who can make things happen out there. Tons of big playability. Wouldn't rule him out just because of a couple of low-end games. And look where he lands points per dollar-wise on DraftKings. He's only 5,200 over there. Comes up as wide receiver 24, but wide receiver 6 by points per dollar. 25 across the board on FanDuel. Nico lands as wide receiver 7-8 on DK, 6-5 on FanDuel, and Diggs right there in the mid-teens. 2 out of 3 of these guys are playable in any Stroud lineup. Any one of those 3 guys is playable in any non-Stroud lineup or as a Stroud +1 combo. Like that receiver core a lot. Dalton Schultz, reasonable tight end option. He's drawn 3 targets a game so far. He hasn't gotten in the end zone. 6.5-yard A-dot, just a minimal downfield opportunity. In week 2, caught 2 of 3 for 21 yards. In week 1, caught 3 of 3, just 16 yards. But sees plenty of opportunity. Ran 28 routes in week 1, 26 routes in week 2. Again, targeted 3 times each. 60 snaps, 43 snaps. The clear primary number 1 there, and a decent safety valve for the young quarterback. He just hasn't really needed him. In that Chicago game, again, they didn't really throw the ball that much overall against Chicago. They didn't need to do much to beat Chicago. I mentioned the running back situation here. No Joe Mixon, which sucks. Joe Mixon is a great fit for this team. Really like what he was doing early. So Cam Akers is going to be picking up a lot of cheap looks. And then Dare Ogunbowale is going to be probably mostly ignored. And I don't know that that's necessarily a great decision. Akers last week, 13 snaps with the offense, carried the ball 7 times for 32 yards. He also caught 1 of 1 DNP in week 1. Last year with Minnesota, Akers carried the ball 38 times for 138 yards and a touchdown. In 2023, he carried the ball 22 times for 29 yards and a touchdown with Los Angeles. Those are numbers for the entire year, not just week 1 of those years. So it's been a minute. Last time Akers was really relevant was 2022. He carried the ball 188 times for 786 yards, scored 7 touchdowns, 4.2 yards per attempt. You know what's impressive about that line? Absolutely nothing. That's a very average, standard running back. That's Devin Singletary could have done that. Am I being unfair to Devin Singletary? I really don't like him. That was his best year, Akers. He was 23 that year. He's 25 now. We're basically dealing with, how often do running backs really bounce back after 2 basically fully absent seasons? Ogbonwale last week carried the ball twice for 3 yards, caught 2 of 2 through the air for 20 yards. Last season carried the ball 8 times for 35 yards. The year before, 42 times for 123 yards and a touchdown. The year before that, 43 times for 137 yards and a touchdown. This is also not a spring chicken. Ogbonwale's 30. So, extreme low faith in both of these guys. There is just, a little bit of familiarity on Ogbonwale. I don't think that Akers is just the runaway freight train of a value option that he might look like outside of everything other than projects okay for a minimal price. He's number 1 by points per dollar on FanDuel. That makes me very uncomfortable. Doesn't have to do a lot, fortunately, at that price. Hopefully he just falls into the end zone. But I really, really question the true quality of that option. Not saying Ogbonwale is just turn around and put him in the lineup instead. For one thing, he's 500 more on FanDuel. A little bit less expensive on DraftKings, but I don't really love either option. I get it, and I do think you're going to have to play some Akers. But I built a placeholder by hand, and he isn't in it. He isn't in it. He isn't in it. Robert Woods, mix and match down the board, hasn't done anything really noteworthy this season yet. Same thing with any of the depth options on that side. British Brooks, also presumably going to be on the field, played entirely with special teams over the first 2 weeks, but presumably will be at least suited up. I wouldn't expect much. Sammy Darnold, 5,500, 7,100. He lands his QB 3 by points per dollar on DraftKings, QB 6 by points per dollar on FanDuel. He was a quarterback I took late in the Superflex League. I had a little faith. It's a great opportunity. Throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson, a lot of things could be worse. Jefferson, 133 yards and a touchdown on 4 catches in week 2, 59 yards and a touchdown on 4 catches in week 1. Darnold threw 2 touchdown passes a week. He's also thrown an interception each week, but he's been over 200 yards. 24 attempts week 1, 26 attempts week 2. Not the best volume, but on the idea that this might get into a little bit more of a shootout, I can see the upside. No Jordan Addison downboard, so limited depth, but probably just leads to increased target share for Justin Jefferson, which is not a bad thing. He's also got Aaron Jones there, a capable receiver out of the backfield. Jones caught 5 of 6 in week 2. Carried the ball 9 times for 32 yards. That was disappointing. In week 1, he carried the ball 14 times for 94 yards and a touchdown. Caught 2 of 2 for 15. Again, reasonable expectation of volume out of the backfield for Jones, and we should see better in a per yard sense when he carries the ball. For the season, he's at 5.5 yards per rush attempt, which is pretty outstanding. Ty Chandler also at 5.5 yards per rush attempt. He's carried the ball 9 times a game. In week 2, he carried it 10 times for 82 yards. In week 1, he carried it 8 times for 17 yards. A clear number 2 option who's going to get a few touches, has a little bit of explosive ability. 53-55, though, across sites when you can have Aaron Jones at 59-66. Doesn't really feel offset by price enough on a slate where there's a lot of value-based guys. probably just leads more opportunity in Cam Akers' direction on the other side of this game, honestly. Jalen Naylor last week caught 3 of 4 for 54 yards. He's also been in the end zone once apiece in the first 2 weeks of the season. In week 1, he only drew 1 target, but he caught it for 21 yards and a TD. He's got a 14.4 yard ADOT so far, 20.8% of the air yard share. The presumptive number 2 going forward, at least while Addison's out. Brendan Powell's only seen a target a game. He's caught it for 8 yards. I'm very proud of him. Josh Oliver, backup tight end at 13-yard ADOT, 1 target a game. Pretty limited as we go down the board. Johnny Munt draws a few targets, but very limited depth. So needs to kind of fall into the end zone with the ball in his hands. So it really, really gets focused heavily right there on those 3 guys for Minnesota stacks. And I think that's playable as a Darnold +2. I think it's a good game to mine some options from the other side. What it probably wouldn't do is grab those 3 where you've got a running back in the mix already and then go to a lineup that includes Cam Akers as a value running back. Because now I require so much clock time to get chewed up by the 2 running backs in that situation that it hampers the upside of the stack. But those 3 plus any of the wide receivers, perfectly fine. Plus a cheap tight end, perfectly fine. Minimal shots to Sherfield. He drew 2 targets in week 2. Caught one of them for 17 yards. Nothing really there. I missed him because he didn't have an air yard share there when I was looking down that column before because he's senior and I forgot to change that one. Most likely bonus guy. I can't think of going any direction but Nico, considering he's been there both times. Tons of volume, tons of skill. Love that Houston passing game. Definitely a buyer on that side. Love stacking this. Whoop. Don't want to move all that. Love stacking this side of this game up. And again, it's the same thing going that way, where if you're grabbing Stroud +1, Stroud +2, you can absolutely grab Jefferson on the other side of it. You can throw Jones into the other side of it at the running back position or a flex spot on FanDuel. There's good options in this game up and down. KC and Atlanta. This one's not on the DraftKings slate. We're going to kind of not completely breeze through it, but we're going to go through it, hopefully at a good clip. 3-point spread. Reasonable game, 46.5 point total. Very nice, juicy total to end the night. I think we've got a number of different late-night hammer options on our hands here. For one, Mahomes and Cousins just provide good opportunities for stacking. They're both reasonably competent quarterbacks. Cousins wasn't out to the best start over the season's first 2 weeks, but had that great drive where he led the team down the field for the win the other day and kind of earned everybody's confidence back and looked really good, looked like the old Kirk Cousins. Was playing against that just, setback prevent defense that was just allowing him to do whatever he wanted, basically. But at least it's a little spark for confidence. He went 20 of 29 in that game. He threw for 241 yards and 2 TDs, 8.3 yards per attempt. So not a bad game. And as I said a few times already, before he got hurt last year, he had, in the 8 weeks he played, he had 4 or 5 300-yard games. He was very, very good at the beginning of last season. So not completely writing off Kirk Cousins, and he's got weapons. Bijan's a high-end running back who can run with the ball, catch the ball a little bit. Caught 4 passes last week, 4 or 5 for 25 yards. Also carried the ball 14 times for 97. That gives me 19 potential touches. Week 1 he had 23 potential touches, 23 actual touches, got over 100 yards from scrimmage. Didn't get in the end zone, but that's a ton of volume and some production from Bijan Robinson. Lands 5'10 across the running back spot on FanDuel. Cousins just 16-17 at quarterback. London 19-15 at the wide receiver position. Pitt's a little bit more interesting at 7-8, but among all those options, he's probably the guy that I trust the least. He does have a touchdown on his ledger so far. He got a touchdown on 3 catches, 26 yards in week 1 on his 3 targets. Week 2, 3 targets, 20 yards, no touchdown or 3 catches, 4 targets. Ran 22 routes week 1, 23 routes week 2. He's out there for most of the snaps. A lot of raw skills. He's just okay. And when they call his number, he kind of tends to disappoint. It's limited average depth of target at 5.6 yard ADOT. He's fine. I just feel disappointed in Kyle Pitts so far. London, 5 targets a game, 7.5 yard ADOT. He's got a touchdown on the board. Much better week 2. 6 of 7 for 54 yards and a TD. Ran 30 routes, was targeted on 23% of them, 56 snaps. They've got interesting downboard options as well. Ray McLeod has drawn 6 targets a game. He's been surprisingly productive. We talked about him on last week's show, or the single game show for this team. Always interested when kick return, punt return type guys get thrust into bigger roles. And that's kind of what's happened with Ray, who over the years has been more of that role. And that just means you've got a really dynamic, speedy, shifty run style, your cones and your shuttle drill type run style, which tends to yield big playability. Over the first couple weeks, Ray was targeted 7 times. He caught 4 of them for 52 yards in week 1. Targeted 5 times in week 2. Came away with 3 catches for 42 yards. Not bad. 3.47 yards per route run in week 1. 1.45 yards per route run in week 2. Picked up a red zone target in week 2. Be nice to get him in the end zone. But he also picked up a carry. I could see them using him in that kind of a role. Think Debo, but not Debo. It's that kind of guy. Foreign teammate. Mooney, 3 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown on 7 targets in week 2. Take that upside and run with it with a, what the hell's his price? $5,300 FanDuel receiver. If they're going to look his direction, he's not completely uninteresting. He doesn't rate out well at all. That's the back end of playability at 45, 43. But if he's going to see 7 targets, that's going to go up. He's going to be better looking than that. It's just the model's not accounting for that many targets. But that makes him interesting if they're going that direction. It's one to watch. Algier picks off some of the rushing volume. In week 1, he carried the ball just 3 times for 21 yards. Week 2, he carried the ball 9 times for 53 yards. Hasn't gotten into the end zone to poach a touchdown yet, but he's always a lurking threat for the Bijan touchdown poaching. He's playable, minimal touches, but he's one of the more playable second running backs that there are, because we do have a reliable 9 to 12 potential touches on any given week with some significant touchdown upside. So as a backup low-cost running back goes, he's one of the more playable guys. Still not my choice, though. Still not something I love to do. And I would, again, rather go to a cheap guy who is in more of a starting role with more guaranteed touches or more guaranteed potential touches. Patrick Mahomes, kind of a no-brainer. The Chiefs stack ranks 6 and 5 on FanDuel, 6 by points, 5 by points per dollar. Mahomes pairs nicely with Rashee Rice, with Xavier Worthy, who's got big playability with all that speed. We saw that week 1. We didn't really see it in week 2. But the way this team plays, he just absolutely fits like a glove. Just dump the ball into his hands, let him make things happen over the middle. It's definitely going to be the interesting guy in that Tyreek Hill role. We saw him take one to the house for on 2 catches, 47 yards and a touchdown in week 1. He also broke a rush for 21 yards and a touchdown. That's the dynamic nature. Came back week 2, caught just 2 of 4 targets, 17 yards, carried the ball once for 5 yards, didn't score, put up like 2 fantasy points. Obviously a major disappointment for anybody that was expecting a repeat of week 1. But I think it's a player we can just continue to mine as far as upside goes. Something is broken in these DraftKings rankings. For one, he shouldn't have a DraftKings ranking. Oh, I didn't zero them out for this game for the skill players. That's why. That shouldn't matter in anything other than this game. I just was wondering where that 122 could have possibly come from. Ranks 22 by raw points on FanDuel where this game exists. 14th by points per dollar. You're getting more upside out of Travis Kelce at tight end 4-5, but we've got Laporta, we've got McBride, we've got guys who have been successful high-end tight ends, while Kelce over the first couple weeks, 3 of 4 in week 1 for 34 yards. In week 2, he came out and caught 1 pass on 3 targets, 5 yards. Played 53 snaps, ran 19 routes, just 3 targets. Limited so far. Mentally out on tour with Taylor. Noah Gray, a reasonable second banana at tight end. He's drawn some targets over the first couple of weeks. He's always involved. 3 targets in week 1, no targets in week 2. So not always involved. But he did run 12 routes, just didn't happen to come away with a lot of targets in a low-volume passing week. They only threw the ball 25 times in week 2, 28 times in week 1. Mahomes came away with 151 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks in week 2. The interceptions and turnovers, giving the ball back to the other team, obviously isn't going to help your pass volume. I think the most noteworthy thing here is Carson Steele. I'm really interested, 5,200. Got him projected out aggressively, but I like the upside. I really, really do. Played 14 snaps last week, carried the ball 7 times, gained 24 yards, ran 3 routes, went untargeted, but picked up the 14 snaps to Samaji's. Where are you? There he is. 5. Right, so we had Pacheco go out, and this kid got the initial look. Samaji, five snaps with the offense last week. Didn't carry the ball on his 8 snaps with the offense in week 1. Drew 2 targets in week 1, caught 1 for 10 yards. 1 target in week 2, caught 1 for 3 yards. Ran 7 routes and 5 routes. So he's out there primarily as a receiving back. This team can do a lot with that role. I think he jumps into probably the 20s as far as his snap share. I think he's going to run some routes. Probably carry the ball a couple times. But I think the primary ball carrier is going to be Carson Steele. When they get in close, when they need somebody to break through for a first down, when they need to put the ball in the end zone from in close, they're not calling Samaji's number for that. That's not what he does. That's kind of what this Carson Steele guy does. We looked him up the other day. He was at Ball State for 2 years, 1,000-yard rusher at Ball State, and then UCLA, I want to say, for his final year in college, and scored some touchdowns. Middle of the road kind of a runner, but KC apparently really likes him. So, yeah, he was the hot pickup of the week in season long. I think I got him in every league. Had a lot of really good draft priorities because I got screwed in the draft order in basically every single league. And then I just outbid everybody in our Fab League. But I like the spot. At least going to pick off some touchdown upside going forward over the next few weeks. We'll see what it looks like. There is a lurking Keontae Ingram down here who probably deserves at least a mention as somebody who might touch the ball. There are skills there. I question the viability. I do not think it's a DFS play. More one to watch. Keeping your thoughts if something happens or if Carson Steele's ineffective. And then they also signed Kareem Hunt, right? Hunt I don't have projected. Yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to be active. If he is, he'll get in there. As far as like the Watsons, the Jujus of the world, the Sky Moores, the Mecole Hardmans, it's been pretty thin down the board. The opportunities. KC's not exactly slinging the ball around like crazy to begin the year. Watson, 1 target week 1, 2 targets week 2. He's caught all 3 of them so far. Juju on 1 target in week 1 on 8 routes, 11 snaps with the offense. Played 11 snaps with the offense week 2. Went untargeted over 4 routes run. Sky Moore, 5 snaps with the offense week 2. Ran 1 route, no targets. Ran 3 routes, no targets in week 1 on 9 snaps with the offense. Mecole Hardman's played 1 snap with the offense over the first 2 weeks of the season. He ran a route on that snap. He went untargeted. He's played 16 snaps on special teams. Yeah, so really it is, as good as KC might be, it's the Mahomes, Rice, Kelsey Worthy show, and then you're just playing the value game running backs wise. If you're stacking this team, I think it's Samaji as the running back that goes into the stack. Carson Steele on his own outside of the stack, I think, picks up value. I don't know that Steele necessarily stacks all that well, though they did target him a little bit. What did I say? 2 targets? Oh, no, I'm sorry, no targets. He ran routes. So he ran routes on 3 of those plays. I'm going to stand by that. I think it's Samaji if you're looking for a running back to build into stacks. Carson Steele just as a value back on his own. And then on the Atlanta side, we broke this down already, didn't we? Yes, we did. Great. Justin Watson. Yeah, I think we talked through most of this. And I said I was going to do this one kind of quickly because it's not on DraftKings. So there you go. Best shot at a bonus, Bijan Robinson. Welcome back, DraftKings gamers. I hope you used your break wisely, took an intermission, went and got a drink, smoked a joint, took a leak, whatever you got to do out there. If you're just joining us, hit the like button. Look forward to hearing your thoughts when you've caught up all the way on 2.5 times speed. Getting through the slate. We are, coming up on 2.5 hours into the show. Not too bad. Feel like we've picked up a little bit of pace. I'm taking kind of a luxurious pace through what I'm saying and using way too many words to say too little stuff as usual, I'm sure. But I feel like we're making our way through the slate a little bit, having carved out part of it the other day with the quarterback show. Check that out too. That's still sitting up there, by the way. A lot of thoughts on the quarterbacks, just the game environments from the other day. Probably hear a lot of the same nonsense. Bob the Builder's here. Bob says, Vikings defense, no joke, but 49ers move the ball through the air pretty well. I'm a Vikings fan, so hard for me to play the Texans. Yeah, I like the upside for the offense in that one. Texans got the offense to play against it, so don't be worried. They may with a running back they may not trust as much. I think Dimitri's saying they may be throwing the ball a little bit more. I could definitely see that. Yeah, rather than putting it in the hands of Akers and Ogunbowale, I can definitely see just, all right, CJ, you didn't have to throw the ball that much last week. Let's throw the ball 45 times this week. And especially if that game stays close, that's just going to trend into shootout territory for sure. Ugly one here. Justin Fields, I believe, is locked in at the helm. Or is Russ is still technically questionable? What's the latest on Russ? Limited in practice. Says he's gaining ground. Yada, yada. It's a line for Fields to make the start. He has not looked good over the first couple of weeks. He's limited. It's limiting to the upside for this team. Some of the pieces are okay. I think both running backs are talented guys with explosive big play ability, but I think they somewhat eat one another's tails, and it's difficult to pick one off week by week. I think Pickens is a good, not great receiver who's kind of been limited by the quarterback play so far. I think Freiermuth's a good tight end. He's seen just okay volume so far. But it lives and dies with Fields really right now. They'll be more interesting, I think, with Russ, if he's got anything left. At our draft, I was ranting and raving about how bad Daniel Jones is. And somebody was trying to mount a defense. And I don't really let that happen most of the time. And I was like, who's worse in football right now? He threw Russ into the mix. And I said, you could take Russ Wilson 5 years forward into the future and bring that version of Russ Wilson back in time. Or you could go 5 years into the future and bring that version of Russ Wilson back in time. And he would be still better than Daniel Jones. I think that's true. I would take Russ over Daniel Jones, bad as Russ might be at this point. We haven't seen him yet this season, obviously. But Fields 17 and 23 in week 1 for 156. He ran for 57 yards on 14 carries, which is only 4.1 yards per rush attempt. Did not look all that good. Came back week 2 through 20 passes, so extremely low volume in the passing attack for Pittsburgh. 13 of 20, 117 yards. He did throw a touchdown pass, carried the ball 8 times for 27 yards. Look, we all know if Justin Fields breaks one on the ground on a day where he also happens to throw 2 touchdown passes, you're going to want to have him at these prices. It's just the numbers of it. But he does not look good. Ranks as 19-17 across points, 14 by points per dollar across sites. And then Herbert, assuming he plays on the LA side, doesn't really look any better. 22nd by points on both sides. He's dealing with an injury, but it seems like he is going to play. It's Easton Stick if not, and Easton Stick plays, you don't want anything really to do with the Chargers. But they've been limited overall. I mean, Herbert's only threw the ball 26 times week 1, 20 times week 2, 144 yards and a touchdown, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. 5.5 yards per attempt, 6.5 yards per attempt. His limited 6.6 intended air yards per pass attempt, completing just 3.3 air yards per pass attempt, getting outdone on completed air yards by Justin Fields. That's pretty weak. Has thrown 3 touchdown passes. I guess you give him that much. The most interesting player for the season on these two teams so far has definitely been J.K. Dobbins, who's carried the ball 13.5 times a game and put up 133 yards a game so far. That was 10 carries for 135 and a touchdown in week 1. He also caught 3 passes in that game. Came right back, 17 carries for 131 and a touchdown in week 2. Caught 1 of 1 for no yards. It's great output so far. 32 snaps, 31 snaps. Efficient, getting it done on minimal snaps and minimal touches. 13 touches in week 1. 18 touches, 18 potential, 18 actual in week 2. So you like the uptick. Hey, nice job out there last week. Here's a few more carries. And he delivered. So presumably going right back to the well with him. I see no issues with it. 64-72. He lands as RB 22, 24, 24. Oh, no, that's stack. Sorry. 19, 27, 18, 28 with the price up a little bit. It's just asking him to repeat the trick again. You do have Gus Edwards still kind of lingering here. Gus could always poach a touchdown. Gus carried the ball 18 times for 59 yards in week 2. Carried the ball 11 times for 26 yards in week 1. So it's not like he's not getting volume. He just hasn't been good. Hasn't been productive. But if Dobbins is only going to get, his 15, 18 touches and Gus is still going to get 15, 18 touches, that means I'm not getting my week of Dobbins getting the ball in his hands 20 plus times. It's going to be a limiting factor. It has not been over the first 2 weeks, but that's something to be wary of if you're considering J.K. Dobbins shares. Does not lead me to want to roster Gus Edwards. I just don't think he's all that good. But there is a little bit of touchdown upside there. Between the receivers, I mentioned Quentin Johnston kind of paying off the first-round draft pick capital that they put into him just last year. 5 catches for 51 on 6 targets and scored 2 touchdowns last week. Week 1, just 38 yards on 3 catches, but was targeted 5 times on 23 routes. Not a bad option, not a great option. Ladd McConkey scored a touchdown in his first week, targeted 7 times, caught 5 of them for 39. Came back, was targeted on just 4 of 16 routes in week 2, caught 2 passes for 26 yards. So more limited week 2 action from McConkey. He's just all right. They're both drawing just, kind of okay dots. 8.1 yards, 10.5 yards, but that represents the true downfield threats on this team right now. Joshua Palmer, the guy that people were kind of excited about in this offense for reasons that were unclear to me coming into the season, he was getting a little bit of buzz, and I really don't get it. First 2 weeks, he saw 4 targets, caught 2 passes for 15 yards, 2 targets, 2 catches, 19 yards in week 2. Congratulations. 7.7 yard ADOT, 15.9% of the air yard share. Hayden Hurst, a 7.4 yard ADOT, hasn't gotten into the end zone, just drawing 2.5 targets a game so far, pretty limited. 2 targets a game for Will Dissly as the second tight end in this offense, who's equally limited. There's really not a lot to like on the Chargers, and it's just the same going down the board on the Pittsburgh side. I mentioned liking Pickens. I do think he's a talented receiver. He's drawn 5.5 targets a game, and he's got the best ADOT in the entire game at 13.4 yards. So he's getting up and getting down the field, but we got to remember it's still Justin Fields throwing it to him. Maybe on his own, maybe in some thin stacks paired with Fields. He's your go-to receiver from this team, no doubt about it. 54% of the air yards, another 12% going in Freiermuth's direction. 4.3 yard ADOT. He's drawing 4 targets a game, 4 catches in both of his first 2 games, I want to say. Yeah, 4 in each game, 27 yards, 39 yards. Ran 22 routes, 21 routes each of the first 2 weeks. He's locked into the role, locked into at least moderate volume. Definitely big play touchdown upside. Not expensive. I don't mind Freiermuth, and he's one of the more playable things, I think, from this game, just as a standalone tight end. 7th by points on DraftKings, 10th points per dollar, 11-10 on FanDuel. Between the running backs, Najee carried the ball 17 times for 69 yards, caught 1 of 2 in week 2. Jalen Warren carried the ball 9 times for 42 yards, caught 2 of 2. So it's another week of 19 potential touches for Najee. Week 1, he had 21 potential touches. And Warren came in week 1, had 4 potential touches, 4 actual touches, and then obviously spiked that up to 13 in week 2. But it's clearly Najee as the number 1, and it's actually a little bit more favoring Najee than I was expecting it to. I thought it would be a little bit more even with Jalen drawing ahead in the passing game. So far, it's kind of favored Najee. He's getting significant carry upside on the ground. Both running backs do have big explosive playability. 56-64, I think Najee is borderline playable here. 24th, 26th on DraftKings, 24th, 29th on FanDuel. Warren probably less so. A little bit more limited volume. You would really need the big monster play out of Warren. Everybody else down board is very limited. Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin. These are not big-time receivers. 8.5 yard ADOT per guy. 2.5 targets a game. Nobody's scored yet. Darnell Washington got one in the end zone as a backup tight end. Washington played 27 snaps in week 2. He ran 3 routes. He was targeted once, and he caught it for 5 yards and a touchdown. He also caught 1 pass on 11 routes run in week 1. 5 yards, no touchdown. If he alternates that all season, he'll come away with a bunch of touchdowns. Don't think that's going to happen. Cordell Patterson, really uninvolved so far. He's carried the ball 3 times a game, 8 yards a game. There's really nothing there. Most likely 100-yard guy. I guess it's got to be Dobbins again, but I really question that. I mean, that volume, that sneaky volume thing has me concerned. Dobbins is a little bit of a trap. I'm going to throw that right out there. Little bit of a trap. Give me Najee. Najee's my most likely bonus guy. I'm as surprised as you are. I think that's right. I really don't like anything from this game. 36-point total, one of the lowest on the board. Yes, we were talking about it before. Yes, you can play Skylar Thompson, especially in large field GPPs. Yeah, he ranks 25, 23, 24, 25 across sites. Yes, he does not have a strong individual projection. Yes, we're not working with a lot of data on this player. But still all it has to do is put the ball in Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, to a lesser extent Jalen Waddle's hands, maybe some Jonnu Smith along the way, just for good measure. Dude's got weapons on his side. Sometimes that's all you need. Checks in at an extremely cheap price of $51.66. Doesn't do anything for his points per dollar rating. It rates just right next to his low-end raw points rating. But all I need is those explosive plays from Achane and Tyreek Hill. And we're there. So I think he works in stacks, given the skill. It's kind of like a Purdy situation where just, or at least when they're at full strength, Purdy just plays so well and gets lofted up by playing with McCaffrey, Debo, and Ayuk, and so on and so forth. It's going to be the same thing in this situation for Skylar Thompson. Thompson, for his part, 8 of 14 last week for 80 yards, 5.7 yards per pass attempt. Obviously, that's not anything exceptional. Been in the league for 3 years. He's completed 68 of 119 passes for 614 yards, which is 5.2 yards per attempt. He's thrown 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. It's not good. Might not need to be. It's just a dart throw, right? If you're building one lineup, if you're building a big $500 lineup for a giant contest that doesn't have a ton of entries in it but has a huge prize pool and so on and so forth, Skylar's probably not your guy. Maybe you get one of his skill players in there. Maybe you get an Achane at running back. Maybe you get a Tyreek share at wide receiver. But across 150 in one of these Milly Maker, couple 100,000 entry type contests, there's nothing wrong with carving out 5-10 shares for Skylar Thompson stacks and hoping for the best. Stranger things have happened with worse players. For their parts, Tyreek, 7 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown in week 1 on 12 targets. And then week 2, playing a lot of the game with Skylar, 3 catches, 24 yards. Carried the ball once for 12 yards. Limiting. 4 catches for 41 last week for Jalen. In week 1, he had 5 catches for 109 yards. No touchdown, but obviously significant output through the air. Jonnu Smith, the tight end, saw 7 targets last week, caught 6 of them for 53 yards. So that's a nice uptick from the 2 targets that he got in week 1. He played 18 snaps week 1, played 32 snaps week 2, ran 27 routes, was targeted on a quarter of those routes. So a little bit of an uptick last time out for Jonnu, and considering the role, safety valve, veteran, tight end, you can definitely see a little bit of upside there. Ranks just 17. I really got to check these value rankings. Something is screwy on that. Some of these. It's not all of them. It's just some of them on the value numbers for DK, because there's no way he's 66 for 3,405 fantasy points. I wouldn't think anyway. 17th by points, but 66 by points per dollar at that price? That doesn't make sense. I'll figure it out. I'll get it corrected on the site. He rates out just okay on FanDuel. I do think there's a little bit of like five catch with a touchdown kind of upside there. Jalen Wright going to be the second running back in behind Devon Achane. For what it's worth, Achane 22 carries after I was saying a couple times that he wasn't an every down back going into last week. I guess he is. 96 yards, no touchdown. He also caught 7 of 7 for a touchdown and 69 more yards. So that's a significant yards from scrimmage total. A lot of touches. 29 potential, 29 actual touches. Couldn't really ask for anything more from a running back. He looks phenomenal. RB1-2 on DK, RB2-2 on FanDuel. Jalen Wright didn't play week 1, week 2. He carried the ball just 5 times for 4 yards, but give him a chance. He's supposed to be skilled. Braxton Berrios is out there running sprints. 34 snaps in week 2. 1 target, didn't catch it. Ran 24 routes. 2 targets on 15 routes in week 1. He's didn't catch any of those either. Jeff Wilson played about 10 snaps with the offense each week. He caught 2 passes in week 2. He carried the ball 5 times for 26 yards in Smythe's absence, or not in Wright's absence rather, in week 1. Smythe caught 1 pass at the tight end position last week. It's probably more Jonnu if you're looking for a tight end to pair with the quarterback. So really limited down through here. From Jonnu up, though, some interesting options. Definitely still think you can stack Dolphins. And you can absolutely stack some cheap Seattle on the other side. Dolphins are in play as run back options over here. The receiving core, at least over here, is in play as run back options over here. 41 point total. I could see this game being more competitive and high scoring than 41 points with Seattle favored by 4.5 if Skylar Thompson can manage to be halfway competent. It's a big if. But I think that's where Vegas is maybe a little bit carried away. Miami's defense, kind of middle of the road. But that offense with those skill players could carry a bad quarterback to success. Geno's a decent quarterback. I almost slipped up and called Geno a good quarterback. Geno's decent. Ranks 10th by points, but second by points per dollar on FanDuel. You also get DK Metcalf as receiver coming in as WR11 and second by points per dollar on the DraftKings slate. So that was DraftKings Geno ranking too. So that's a pretty dynamite points per dollar pairing with those two right there. Then you get JSN coming in at 5 points per dollar. Not far behind Tyler Lockett at 28. Their running back is RB11, 5. There's a lot of value baked in on Seattle this week. On FanDuel, it's slightly less emphatic, but it's definitely there. QB 10-11 for Geno, 10-6 at the wide receiver spot for DK, 11-4 for Charbonnet, probably the best piece of value there. JSN, just, mediocre, 31-37. Oh, sorry, that's Lockett. 21-18. That's a little better for JSN. He picked up a little bit more in week 2. We talked about it with the week 1 output. He only caught 2 of 2 for 19 yards in week 1, despite running 24 routes on 48 snaps. Came back in week 2, 55 snaps, 40 routes run, targeted on 40% of his routes, caught 12 of 16 passes for 117 yards. Didn't score, but that's still monster volume. In terms of the depth, that pushed him up to 9.9 average depth of 9.9 yard average depth of target. For most of last year, that was operating a lot closer in toward the line of scrimmage, and that was the case in week 1. Popped it back out. Now we're dealing with 33.5% of the air yards. Lockett gets the ball downfield, 10.8 yard ADOT, 18% of the air yards, and DK does as well, 11.7 yard ADOT, 39% of the air yards. Touchdown already in the books for DK. He had 129 yards and a touchdown on 10 catches, 14 targets in week 2. So between him and JSN, that's 22 catches and 30 targets in week 2. 200 plus yards and a touchdown. It's a lot of volume going to those two receivers in week 2. Lockett was the odd man out. Might be the way that this offense goes, where 2 of them get a lot of volume and 1 of them's kind of the odd man out each week. He dropped from 6 catches, 77 yards on 7 targets in week 1, 21 routes run. He ran 38 routes in week 2, but he was targeted on just 5.3% of them. 2 targets caught him both for 15 yards. Week 3 probably falls into the middle for both him and JSN. And then DK still the prime target. But all 3 of those guys are easily playable and stacked with Geno. You can grab 2 out of 3 of them and put them together. Noah Fant is a moderately playable tight end. 4.9 yard ADOT, nothing exceptional there. Draw some targets, though. 3.5 targets a game so far. Needs to fall into the end zone. Jake Bobo really not involved, not drawing any targets, not getting downfield at all on the limited targets that he has seen. 1 target a game for Darica Young and Laviska Shenault. Nothing much to speak of down the depth chart. In terms of defenses, probably not entirely crazy to consider some Seattle defense. They rank 6-7 across sites by just raw points. Miami's defense just ranks out well by points per dollar. They're very cheap, 2,500, 3,500, but they're 14th and 15th by points, 3rd on both sides by points per dollar. They have been good against the pass so far. Or no, I'm sorry, that's Seattle's defense. It gets funky when I'm thinking about the defense over there, and then I start looking at the defense over here because that's the opposing defense against Miami, which obviously this defense is not playing directly against that defense. That's why I wanted to be totally clear about the red numbers on the groups article, which are the opposing defense's numbers. Keep in mind. So, Tyreek Hill, best shot at the bonus, but a lot of options in this game. Definitely, for as low a total as that is at 41 points, this is an appealing game. This is a game I'll definitely consider having some of, and it's a very, very good game to mine skill players from. If you're just building stacks of other lineups, just anybody from this side, from DK, Charbonnet, JSN, Tyler Lockett, anybody from that group, anybody from the group of those 2, plus Jalen, honestly, plus Jonnu. There's a lot of skill player options in this game. Could be a game where another thing that I do like to build into some of my builds when I dash off thousands and thousands of lineups to drop into Sims or drop into lineup ranking, however you do it. One thing that I like to build into a few of them is in a non-stacked game, right? So a game, I'll get my quarterback with a QB plus Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, and I'll go to even do I'll go to a +1 there, and then from some other game, I want 2 premium pass catchers who are going to be on opposite sides dueling one another. Not that there's a direct head-to-head, they're in a actual, duel competing with one another, but a game where there is the legitimate idea of premium passing on both sides, scoring on both sides, and very high-end players. For example, a Tyreek Hill and DK Metcalf pairing in a lineup that has neither of the quarterbacks and nothing else from this game. I think that's interesting because one goes off and it just feeds the upside. One guy scores, the other guy's team is going to have to march the ball back down the field, outside of the first touchdown of the game, obviously. So scoring by one wideout could potentially feed the upside for more scoring from the other wideout and back and forth. And this game's got a lot of options to do that with. Jalen DK works, Jalen Tyler Lockett works, Tyreek Hill Tyler Lockett, where so on and so forth. So just another lineup building little wrinkle that I like to put into some lineups. But yeah, Tyreek the best option for a bonus. 3 games to go. Ugly one here. Malik Neighbors probably the best thing about this game, with apologies to Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy, who are very talented wide receivers and a lot more experienced in their own right. But I think the kid probably has the highest end overall skill set at the wideout position. He ranks 9 on both sides by raw points, First by points per dollar on the DraftKings board at the wide receiver position. Third by points per dollar at the wide receiver position on FanDuel. And that is really, including the quarterback, the only thing that looks good from the New York Giants. I said it at the beginning of the show, I'll say it again, is entirely because of Malik Neighbors that Daniel Jones looked at all competent last week. Neighbors was targeted 18 times last week. These are the Giants' targets from last week. I showed this the other day. I'm glad it's still up. Neighbors was targeted 18 times. Slayton was targeted 4 times. Wandale was targeted 4 times. Devin Singletary got a target out of the backfield. Nobody else got a target in that game. When I say that it was all Malik Neighbors, and I say that he dragged Daniel Jones to success even though they lost the game, it was all Malik Neighbors and he dragged Daniel Jones to success even though they lost the game. 10 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown, and could have been better if he had some better thrown balls. Singletary's just okay. I'm really not a fan. 57, 6,000 he rates out decently. 21, 23, 20, 22 across sites at the running back position. So far this year, he's gaining 5.1 yards per rush attempt. I don't want to take everything away from him. He's carried the ball 13 times a game. He's put one in the end zone, 2.5 yards before contact, 2.6 yards after contact. Just looks a lot like Devin Singletary to me, and I've never been excited to roster Devin Singletary for fantasy, so I don't know why I would now. He's never gained 1,000 yards in his career. He's just a mediocre to average running back. Yes, he's one of the better pieces from the Giants, but that and 290 will get you shot by the New York NYPD trying to get on the subway. Wandale draws some targets, but hasn't been good. 42, 29, 44, 46 across sites. Darius Slayton, 58, 46, 61, 56 across sites. Giants ranked 17 and 19 by points, 14 and 19 by points per dollar. They're entirely skippable as a stack. Their defense doesn't really rate out great. 7th by points per dollar on FanDuel. Maybe you get to a few shares of Giants D because we really don't think much of the Browns' attack overall. But the Giants D hasn't been good, and they're going to make the Browns probably look pretty decent this week. I do think a lot of both Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy as receivers. Cooper, just 3 catches for 11 yards last week, 2 catches for 16 yards in week 1. That was despite 9 targets in week 1, 8 targets in week 2. If you think that was Amari Cooper's fault, you've probably never seen Amari Cooper and Deshaun Watson play football at the same time. Jerry Jeudy, 3 catches, 25 yards, and a touchdown on 8 targets in week 1. Same thing, just some poorly delivered balls. 5 catches for 73 yards in week 2 on 6 targets. That's a better efficiency game. Both guys are going to just be limited by the quality of the quarterback play, but they are capable receivers. 14.3 yard average depth of target for Cooper, a 13.3 yard average depth of target for Jeudy. Significant target volume. Just depends on whether or not they're catchable balls, but 42.8% of the air yards, 32.8% of the air yards. Jerome Ford going to presumably be the bell cow running back for this team right now. Ford had 7 carries for 64 yards in week 2, caught 1 of 2, but gained no yards. Had 12 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown in week 1, caught 6 of 7 for 25 yards. Should have upside. Going up against a pretty inept rush defense. Donta Foreman's also in the backfield there. He's carried the ball 7 times a game, putting up 3 yards per rush attempt to Ford's 5.7 yards per rush attempt. There's a significant talent gap there. 3.6 yards before contact, 2.1 yards after, 54 yards overall a game. I don't mind Ford as a standalone running back. Not a ton of involvement in the passing game for him. Cleveland favored by 6, 39-point total. You could see a lot of action going Ford's way. Second half, chew the clock up, end the game kind of action. So on volume and on expectations of them kind of winning this game fairly handily, I think Ford's at least on the board. Elijah Moore had 6 catches for 44 yards on 8 targets in week 2. Was targeted 6 times, but only caught 3 of them for 9 yards in week 1. Another guy who just needs the ball to land in his hands to actually catch it and make anything happen. Not the best overall receiver, but a dynamic player when the ball gets into his hands. He's just okay at the price. Jordan Akins, a backup quality tight end, lands 22-19 on DraftKings, 20 across the board on FanDuel. He picked up 1 catch on 1 target last week, 3 catches on 4 targets in week 1. No David Njoku continuing for this team. Theo Johnson, the Giants tight end, came out, played 79% of the snaps in week 2, 83% of the snaps overall. Ended up last week, ran 15 routes, played 40 snaps, 15 routes, went untargeted. 31 routes on 59 snaps in week 1. He was targeted 4 times but caught just 1 of them. Daniel Bellinger, the incumbent, played 15 snaps in week 1 and 3 snaps last week. Ran 6 routes, was targeted once, caught it for 3 yards. 2 routes untargeted in week 2. And then I mentioned before, Chris Manhertz on this team now. 19 snaps with the offense in week 1. Ran 3 routes untargeted. 23 snaps, no routes untargeted in week 2. Out there mostly as a blocker, but now we're spreading out any kind of shares across multiple options at the tight end position. I do think Theo Johnson is apparently going to be the lead in terms of receiving opportunities, but it's pretty thin. They haven't really looked his direction all that frequently, and Daniel Jones is awful. No opportunities downboard here. Tyrone Tracy, not much to like in the backup running back sense. It's a really low-end game. Most likely to go over 100 and get a bonus, Jerome Ford. It's probably Ford. I was going to say Neighbors, but I don't want to be too much of a homer. For a team that's a 6-point dog in a 39-point game, that would be a stretch. He's on that list. He's the most likely guy to get a bonus from the Giants, but he's probably outdone by Ford. Love this game. One of our last 2, Philly and New Orleans, 49.5-point total. New Orleans favored by 2.5 at home, but that's basically a wash. Love all the low-ranked players. Single-digit rankings abound in this game. A lot of skilled players in this game. 2 good quarterbacks. Derek Carr coming out of the gate completely on fire this season. Like the options, like the connection he developed with Rashid Shaheed. I like Shaheed so much coming into this year that I drafted him late in last year's draft. Didn't keep him, redrafted him late in this year's draft. Could only keep 3 guys, and he didn't make the list once I had it established. But he was somebody I absolutely wanted to make sure I got back. Probably took him around too early, but got him in like the, 15th round or something. Actually, no, it was probably like the 13th round this year. I think it was a 17th round keeper, and I got him in the 13th this year. Something like that. But I love the weapons that Carr's got to work with. I really like how he's looked. I like how aggressive they've been on offense so far. They rank out probably better for me than they do for most places around the industry, but I'll take it. I'm going to roll with it. I sat there and I looked at it for a couple minutes when it first came up, and I said, do I want to change that? Do I want to get in there and weigh and put my finger on the scales? And Philly's pass defense sucked last year, and it sucks again this year. Their rush defense has been terrible out of the first 2 weeks. They were better last year. But so far this year, they're getting up 6.4 yards per rush attempt, 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Looks like a targetable defense. New Orleans ranks first by points per dollar and points on both sites. Carr's thrown 5 touchdowns, 221 yards a game, 19.5 attempts per game so far, completed 77% of his passes, a beautiful 8.6 intended air yards per attempt that ranks second only to Anthony Richardson. Completing 11.4 yards per pass attempt on the season. It's a monster number. Has significant downfield threats and connections with Chris Olave at 11.4 yards on average. 17.6 yard ADOT for Rashid Shaheed, who's getting more than 4 looks a game at that level. 46% of the air yards he scored in week 1. He scored again in week 2. Olave yet to get in the end zone. Drawing 4 targets a game, catching just 3 of them, 46 yards per game, but we know there's true number 1 upside with Chris Olave any given week. Week 2 was better than week 1 for Olave. He had 4 catches for 81 yards. Week 1, he had just 2 catches for 11 yards. Targeted 6 times in week 2 versus 2 times in week 1. Oddly ran just 13 routes on 40 snaps in week 2. Ran 21 routes on 48 snaps in week 1. But again, their passing volume was more limited in week 2. Derek Carr threw for 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He only threw the ball 16 times. It's because Alvin Kamara had himself a day. Kamara carried the ball 20 times, 115 yards against Dallas. He scored 3 touchdowns. He also caught 2 of 3 for 65 more yards and another touchdown. It's a 4-touchdown day if you're not doing the math. Pretty good. I expect against Philly, the passing volume is going to go back up. They're going to need to score to hang in this game. I expect Philly's passing volume is going to be significant. I expect more out of the Philly offense than we've seen, or than we saw last week anyway. They're going to have to hold up their end because this New Orleans team, I think, is legit. I think their defense is not bad. I favor New Orleans in this game as far as which team I would rather stack. I'll have some Philly stacks for sure. I think a lot of Jalen Hurts. Absolutely love Saquon, both on his own and in stacks. Devonta Smith is a high-end receiver. Dallas Goedert's a reasonable tight end. But give me New Orleans. Taysom Hill, if you're a fan, I'm really not. I've talked about it already a couple times this season. I really think chasing the gadget play doesn't really work out that much when the gadget play is actually popular. And a guy like Taysom Hill, he pops up for popularity. Jesus. He lands at popularity on a fair number of sites. And really, he only pops for a score. I can't stop saying pop. He only goes off for a score twice a year, if that. It's really, really limited. He loses more than he wins. And I think that's true even in the sense of, you play the most contrarian approach and you're just chasing the one big win a year, so on and so forth. I really don't think he's the right selection most weeks. 21 snaps with the offense in week 1. He caught 1 of 2 targets. He carried the ball 5 times for 35 yards. Didn't get in the end zone. 1 of 1 on 26 snaps. Carried the ball 3 times for 18 yards. Didn't get in the end zone in week 2. I don't know. It's a limiting player. They've got Foster Moreau, who's been the nominal starting tight end each of the first 2 weeks. He played 48 snaps week 1, drew 4 targets, caught all 4 of them for 43 yards and a touchdown, frustratingly. 44 snaps with the offense last week, went untargeted. I continue to think that Juwan Johnson is the true receiving tight end with this team, but it's a little bit more difficult to defend that position when 22 snaps in week 1, caught 2 of 3 targets for 26 yards and a touchdown, which is good, but that's limited output, limited opportunity with the snap count. 23 snaps in week 2, went untargeted on 4 routes run. So I'm a little concerned there. I would expect that he's going to step back into the more featured role as a receiving tight end when they need it, but it just might not be a big part of their offense this year in this new version of the New Orleans offense. So I'm a little bit worried about that. No real target love for Seth Wilson. He ran 5 routes, went untargeted week 1. 1 route went untargeted week 2. Tipton's run 9 routes total, drawn 1 target total. Nothing really down the board. But I really like the top end of the Saints. And Kamara, by the way, in stacks on his own, however you can get him in your lineup, perfectly fine to include. Wouldn't expect 4 touchdowns again, but 2 is on the board for sure. Handful of yards, solid target volume, excellent rush volume. One of the bigger potential touch options any given week, until further notice. Hurts, not a bad option. Not out of the gate great, I would say. He's thrown 3 touchdowns, but also thrown 3 picks, 6.7 intended air yards per attempt, completing 7.2 air yards per attempt. Throwing the ball a solid 32 times a game so far is pretty good. He does land as QB 2-5 on DraftKings, 2-1 on the FanDuel slate, so obviously we like the quarterback a little bit. They're stacked 2-4 on DK, stacked 2-9 on FanDuel, so this is stacks number 1 and 2 by fantasy points. Obviously, they've got the more challenging matchup against the defenses in a so far over the first 2 weeks of the season state, but this Philly team is good enough and their line is good enough and their skill players are good enough to beat just about anybody. Saquon checks in, carrying the ball 23 times a game over the first 2, 102 yards per game. Looks pretty dynamite. Had that big drop toward the end of last week's game that would have salted the game away. That obviously hurt, but has been pretty great and has put up significant volume so far. 24 carries, 109 yards, and 2 TDs in week 1. Also caught 2 passes for 23 yards and a touchdown. That put him at 26 potential, 26 actual touches. Came right back, 22 carries, 95 yards, in a more limited week 2 as far as the output, but not limited in terms of the volume. 22 carries, 5 targets, put him at 27 potential, caught 4 of the targets for 26 actual touches. So again, amongst all running backs, amongst all players really, Saquon has nearly unrivaled potential touches in any given week. Heavily involved in both aspects of the game, and I think it just increases as they go forward. Tons of touchdown upside, tons of big play upside. He's carried the ball 13 times in the red zone already, and he's been targeted 3 times in the red zone already. Monster touchdown upside. Devontae Smith, very effective downfield receiver, had 7 catches for 84 in week 1 on 8 targets, 7 catches for 76 on 10 targets in week 2, playing without AJ. 9.4 yard ADOT, 43.26% of the air yards so far. You also got a decent ADOT down the field for Johnny Wilson here, who's been targeted just once. That's really the 2 downfield options. I took Wilson off the board. I think Wilson reverted to the practice squad. If he's on the roster, we'll get him projected. Britton Covey, I mentioned before, was getting involved a little bit with some targets. He was targeted 6 times in week 2. Caught all 6 of them, but gained just 23 yards. It's a very limited opportunity because he works just right in around the line of scrimmage. A lot of those were just little bubble screen type plays where he's catching the ball behind the line and then just didn't really do much with it. But he does have that game breaker kind of a skill set. There's another guy who's a former punt and kick returner. So you put the ball in his hands and maybe something happens. And on the idea that was part of their game plan last week and could be part of their game plan again, I think he becomes a little bit of a sneaky option. John Dotson in week 2 picked up just 1 target. Was out there for 55 snaps, ran 33 routes, and was targeted 1 time. He caught it for 6 yards. He went untargeted 30 snaps, 23 routes in week 1. Brought the poor guy over from DC just to run sprints. Kenny Gainwell behind Saquon, really not much volume. 2 carries last week, 1 carry in week 1. Just 1 target for the season so far. Dallas Goedert targeted 4 times in week 2, caught 3 of them for 38 yards. Targeted 5 times week 1, caught 4 of them for 31 yards. 1 red zone target so far on the season. It came last week, but a significant target for this team in the red zone. Any given slate, multiple touchdown upside on limited volume, limited yardage, but multiple touchdown upside. Not much else down the board. Your most likely bonus guy is probably Alvin Kamara, but Saquon's right there. Call that a tie. Given the volume between those 2 players, call that a tie. Your one concern with stacking this game becomes, does it just become a fist fight between Saquon and Kamara, where they both pick up 28 touches, a lot of it on the ground, a lot of it on screen passes that don't get dropped, don't slow the clock. That's where some of this game could get chewed up if you overstack this game. It's my one concern, but considering the dynamic nature of those 2 players, the significant high scoring nature of those 2 players, and the involvement in the passing game, and the fact that you can build them both into stacks, I really don't sweat it that much. Love this game for upside. Last one up, gang. Handful of people here sticking it out at the 3-hour mark. I love it. I'm a loser till I win the Milly. What's going on, buddy? What do you like from this slate, Terry? RB wide receiver or pay for tight end? I'll always take a take a discounted tight end, because at the tight end spot, outside of the top 5 guys on any given slate, you're really dealing with a couple of targets and whichever guy falls into the end zone. So if you can bullseye that at a cheap price, pick off that cheap touchdown upside, that's one position that a lot of the time you can get away with, kind of the opposite of what I was saying earlier at the running back or the wide receiver spot, where, yeah, he just scored a touchdown. He caught 2 balls, gained 12 yards, but scored a touchdown. That can get you most of the way there with a cheap price at the tight ends position. Where at the running back, the wide receiver spot, when you start talking about those discounts, unless you're going to the guys who have stepped into a new role, like a Carson Steele at a low price, Unless you're going to somebody like that, if you're dealing with discounted guys, you're really limiting your opportunity. You're limiting your volume potential. And you really want to focus, especially at running back. To me, running back is 100% all about the touch potential. I want explosive players, yes. I want big play upside and so on and so forth. I want involvement in the passing game if I'm stacking them. But the biggest thing to me about running backs is that potential touch volume. Wide receiver, less so. You obviously want the most targeted guys, and you can get that. You can roster 4 wide receivers in a lineup on FanDuel, 3 on DraftKings, where it's aligned to a what am I trying to say? Where you're getting 3 significant target volume wide receivers, where you're getting 10 targets a game for all 3 of those guys, just for how the pricing breaks down across different teams in their weekly opportunities. So I feel like you can still buy, even at 3 different price tiers, a lot of volume at the wide receiver spot. But it is also a position that, by nature of a guy on lower volume but is a super deep target average, like I was talking about with a Rashid Shaheed, those things can even out at the receiver position, where they don't really at running back, where they do less so at tight end. Hopefully that made some sense as an answer. But the short answer is I would take the discount at tight end. Kyren Williams looks like the most appealing spot of a dramatically reduced and less appealing Rams attack here. Demarcus Robinson going to be the number 1 receiver for poor Matthew Stafford, who lost Puka Nacua week 1 and then lost Cooper Kupp week 2. That tragically limited Stafford's output. He had connected with Cooper Kupp. He targeted him 21 times in week 1 and connected with him like half of that, or 14 times, I think. And is not going to have anywhere near that kind of a connection with DeMarcus, with Tyler Johnson, with Jordan Whittington. There is still a little bit of talent down through that receiver core. I don't want to totally write them off because Stafford is so good at what he does. But we're at the back end of everything from Stafford. He was getting some help from those 2 superstar receivers that he was working with. Now he's going to be a little bit more limited playing with these guys. Whittington had a touchdown called back on a run in week 1. Doesn't look like he did much of anything in week 2. Two catches, 22 yards on 2 targets in week 2. Technically went statless in week 1, but did have a touchdown run that was called back, unfortunately. Kyren, again, the most interesting piece, but the output's not been great so far. Week 1, 18 carries for 50 yards, did score a touchdown. Week 2, 12 carries, 25 yards, scored a touchdown. Also caught 4 of 5 for 27 yards. Pretty limiting. A lot of touches in the red zone, 4 carries in the red zone in week 1, 5 carries in the red zone in week 2. Also 1 target in the red zone in week 1, 3 targets in the red zone in week 2. So, I mean, he is the guy they're looking for once they get into the red zone. Significant touchdown upside. I think it's almost exclusively Kyren Williams on his own from the Rams side. I really don't like the Rams as a stack this week. DeMarcus targeted 4 times last week, caught 2 of them for 50. 7 targets in week 1, caught 4 of them for 42. Has not gotten in the end zone yet. 1 target apiece in each game in the red zone. Tyler Johnson, 5 catches, 79 yards on 7 targets in week 1, but just 2 of 3 for 20 yards in week 2. 1 target in the red zone in week 1, 2 targets in the red zone in week 2. Colby Parkinson, the tight end, was disappointing last week. Just 1 catch on 2 targets, 12 yards. Was targeted in the red zone, but obviously no real upside there. Tutu Atwell got involved a little bit. He only played 10 snaps, ran 10 routes, picked up 4 targets, and caught 3 of them for 48 yards. There's a little bit of familiarity there, if nothing else. But if we're talking about Tutu, we are way out in the weeds here. I think that's pretty limiting. So we're, again, really just focusing, I think, on Kyren off the top of the Rams. And then on the Niners side, we talked about them a little bit briefly, but they still look pretty good to me. It's weird that they can lose as many star caliber players as they have already this season and still come up looking all right. But 43.5 point total. They're 6.5 point favorites in a road game with their best running back, their number 1 running back, their number 1 receiver, and their number 1 tight end all out. It's a deep team. Jordan Mason looks fantastic. RB 5-1 on DraftKings, RB 1-3 on FanDuel. We talked about Mason, his big playability, his explosiveness in a per-touch sense prior to that week 1 performance where he snuck in. We were doing a showdown show. We found out he was playing in the middle of the show. Came out, carried the ball 28 times for 147 yards and a touchdown, caught 1 of 1 for 5 yards. Week 2 basically replicated that performance. 20 carries, 100 yards, touchdown, 1 catch, 4 yards on 1 target. Not too shabby. Called his number just a couple fewer times, but he played almost as many snaps, 57 snaps week 1, 54 snaps week 2. It's not like he's threatened to have that job taken away from him. I love the upside for another 100 rushing yard day. Can get involved in the passing game if they need him. He's carried the ball 5 times in the red zone in week 1, 6 times in the red zone in week 2. Ayuk targeted 5 times in each of the first 2 weeks, caught 2 for 28 in week 1, 4 for 43 in week 2. It's been kind of limited as far as the output goes so far this season, but a decent 10.1 yard ADOT. Gonna be the primary receiver, the first read receiver in most of their plays this week. Juwan Jennings, a capable number 2, though. He's more of like a number 4, number 5 in this offense, but steps in as a capable number 2 this week. 20.6% of the air yards so far, 4.5 targets a game, 12.1 yard average depth of target. Week 1, he caught 5 of 5 for 64 yards. Week 2, he caught 2 of 4 for 37 yards, played 33 snaps and 38 snaps, ran 30 routes. That's an uptick from 17 in week 1, was targeted on 13% of them, was targeted once in the red zone each week. Definitely upside playability for Juwan Jennings. Gets a little bit more thin around the Chris Conleys of the world. Not exactly involved in the offense over the first couple of weeks. 1 catch on 1 target in week 2. He played 8 snaps with the offense, ran 4 routes, drew 1 target. 28 snaps with the offense in week 1, ran 6 routes, went untargeted. Kyle Juszczyk just gets involved through the passing game. Caught 2 of 3 for 40 yards in week 1. Almost got into the end zone to pay off those showdown shares. Ooh, that was close. 3 of 5 in week 2, 19 yards. The 8 targets over 2 weeks for Kyle Juszczyk is not nothing. For 4,300, it's a total dart throw, and it more likely than not burns your running back spot even at a cheap price. You really would need him to get in the end zone. 55-48, 55-55 across sites. It's really not worth doing. If you build a bunch of San Francisco stacks, maybe you can throw 1 or 2 in there. If you want to use him as a super cheap running back just on his own in 1 or 2 lineups, maybe you throw the dart. He needs to score that touchdown for you. But he has seen volume in the passing game, and that will probably continue this week. Just on the idea that, multiple missing receivers, missing running back, missing their starting tight end, Juszczyk could fill that role in the offense as just the safety valve receiver. Jake Tongs, Braden Willis, Eric Saubert, those are the guys that are going to step in. Willis is still with the practice squad as of the last time I checked, but probably gets called up to fill a depth role. Tongs was out there for 1 snap each of the first 2 weeks with the offense, played 16 and 13 with special teams. Seibert's the most likely guy. He played 19 snaps week 1, 25 snaps week 2, caught 2 of 2 for 26 yards on 10 routes run in week 2. Ronnie Bell, just as a total depth option, 6 snaps with the offense, ran 5 routes, went untargeted in week 2. 13 snaps with the offense, 6 routes went untargeted in week 1. Jacob Cowing is also yet to draw a target. So yeah, it's weirdly still kind of deep with those guys, but it thins out. Juszczyk would be like the only other reasonable option down that way. Niners defense may be on the board a little bit. They rank 5 by points, 13 by points per dollar on DraftKings at 3,500. That might be another one of those mistake DraftKings value rankings. I've got to figure out what's going on there. 5th by points per dollar on FanDuel. Defense on the other side, not at all appealing. That's about it. Most likely 100-yard guy from this game. It's got to be Jordan Mason. Him or Ayuk, I'll call them a reasonably close tie. I could see Ayuk having a game here. Even with them keying in on him, it's not exactly an intimidating defense. A lot of passing available in this game as far as the defenses have played so far this year. Just a 43.5 point total despite 2 very bad defenses over the first 2 weeks, but I would expect the Niners to improve at least. That's it. 8:52. We got out of here before 9 o'clock. How about that? Man, put that work in. I appreciate it. Appreciate you too, Brother Noomsy. Love the name too. Brother Noomsy. Good stuff. I want the knife. Yeah, that's about it, man. I really kind of running out of things to say to wrap this one up here. We've talked about all these different games, so much up and down. Talked about our favorite stacks of the day. Really like that New Orleans Philly game. Love the idea of getting some late night hammer out of this KC Atlanta game on FanDuel. Think that's going to be key. There's a bunch of different weapons in that game that could go off. There's also just the super cheap, potentially pretty chalky running back from the KC side on that one. Don't mind the Miami stack, even with Skyler. Going to keep going back to that. Just as an idea. Not as a key play, but they're on the board a little bit more than other places might think. Hate the Giants outside of Malik Neighbors. Don't love Cleveland either. New Orleans, Philly, both sides. San Fran. Houston, Minnesota, both sides. Like that one. Prefer Houston to Minnesota. Detroit, Arizona, both sides. Prefer Detroit to Arizona, but both sides of the 52-point game there, the highest on the slate. And then a little both sider in Dallas and Baltimore. I don't mind the idea. It's not completely crazy to take like a Lamar naked, but also throw in like CD from the other side of it. Wouldn't be a completely crazy approach to that game. Just as a weird final thought for you. So I'm going to punch out, guys. I'm going to get to writing up the game notes in the Optimizer and Groups article. We'll get everything, at least one more update, probably multiple updates through the projections as we get actives, inactives, and all of that. I'll rerun rankings at some point through there. I'll definitely make sure to figure out if anything's going on with those value rankings. Maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe those are the correct rankings. Who the hell knows? I don't think they are. But the points per dollar, I'll correct on DraftKings. We'll get that reposted. And yeah, everything will be there for you. The above-below article I'll get punched up. That'll come probably toward morning. It's going to be another overnighter. That one typically is the last thing I do for the week before I go and start building my lineups. If you haven't read that one, very successful week 1. Decent week 2. I wasn't as thrilled with week 2 for the above-below, but we hit a few of them. We did okay with it. But that's the one where I get in and I talk about the different plays that I have either projected above or projected below the industry average, and like what I think about why and what the game situations are, and whether or not we should exploit those advantages. So I can tell you right now, Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints going to be featured in that column in the aboves section. And that's about it, gang. Good luck out there this week. Somebody go win something, particularly if it's $1 million. Come on back on Monday for some baseball. Last week of the baseball season next week. Otherwise, you guys absolutely rock. Hit the like button. I'll be kicking around Discord all night and into tomorrow. So any questions or comments or anything like that, hit me up in there. Check out acemind.io. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Saturday, guys. See ya.